We are introduced to Kanata, who has just made the horrible mistake of going on a date with Crazy. If it wasn't already clear, those 38 stab wounds were fatal, so Kanata gets isekai'd in the worst possible way. But things don't get any better for him in his next life either, as he wakes up to find this old, ugly goblin staring at him. He doesn't understand what's going on, but it seems he has been reborn as one of them, so the elder gives him a new name, Gobro. The old man then proceeds to shove a big and juicy maggot down his throat for that bonus protein. And since Gobro is a baby, he can't speak or refuse anything. By day 2, he woke up to find himself surrounded by tons of ugly green babies, and he is faced with the reality that he is just as ugly as them. He comes to terms with the fact that he died and was reborn as this weak and helpless baby, so he spends the rest of the day crying over the loss of his beautiful human face. By day 3, he realizes that goblins seem to mature way faster than humans do, but that doesn't change the fact that he is still bald though. At least he is able to move and speak again now. So while it's not ideal, he chooses to make the best of the new life he has been given and heads out to face the world. On day 4, the now mostly grown goblins meet with the elder once more as he is holding a platter of maggots for them. He tells them he is done with taking care of them since they are freeloaders, so after today, they are on their own when it comes to finding food to eat. Gobro doesn't like the idea of eating maggots willingly, but it's pure protein, so he scarfs them down regardless. Afterwards, he now has to head out into the world all on his own, and as he exits the cave, he finds a beautiful world with unfamiliar plants and animals all around. One other goblin that had followed him is scared to be outside for the first time ever, so Gobro tries to reassure him by saying it's his first time seeing this place as well. The other goblin is Gobakichi, and although he is not very smart, Gobro decided to team up with him for one very important reason. He got the bulk genetics, so he's going to be helpful in hunting for food. They find a rabbit in the forest, so Gobro sends Gobakichi to attack it from the front. The rabbit runs away from him, but this was all part of the plan as Gobro had set himself up in a nearby tree, so as soon as the rabbit got within range, he leaps down from the tree and snaps the bunny's spine with that stick. This hunting strategy is really effective, but after the bunny has been caught, Gobakichi started getting a little greedy over the bunny, so Gobro had to smack some sense into him so he knows who's in charge here. After giving him a good dose of domestic abuse, Gobro begins prepping the bunny so it can be ready for their dinner. He snaps the rabbit's corn off, and after inspecting it, he figures he should be able to make a decent weapon out of this thing. Just then, he sees a notification in his head, and he doesn't know what to make of it since the elder never gave a tutorial on this. But his thoughts are cut off as Gobakichi has recovered and is salivating for his share of meat. Gobro conceives and pulls out the meat, which Gobakichi proceeds to gobble up with gratitude. On the 5th day, the two continue their hunting strategy, and Gobro has successfully implemented that rabbit horn as a weapon. As he takes a new horn from the rabbit, he receives a notification in his head again, but he's still not sure what it's supposed to be. He sits down to eat some meat, but once he takes a bite, his eyes begin to glow blue, and he is informed that he has acquired an escape skill from the rabbit. It all makes sense to him now as he recalls that in his past life, he had the rare ability of absorption, which allowed him to have a chance of absorbing the abilities of anything he eats. Although he still has absorption, it seems that all the other abilities he managed to gain have been reset since he is in a new body. It's still pretty lucky that he got to keep a skill at all, so he's okay with how things have played out since there are plenty of monsters lurking in the forest that he can eat to gain power. By day 6, Gobro has already started attracting girls with his impressive meat. She is amazed that he and Gobakichi had managed to capture horned rabbits when others have died trying to do the same. And since she actually has hair, it is officially confirmed that goblins can have follicles, but Gobro and Gobakichi are just bald. Gobro asks if she would like to participate in their hunt for the next day, and she was overjoyed at the offer. But on the 7th day, it rains so much that they had to postpone their hunt. Since he has nothing better to do, Gobro decides to go check out what they've got in storage since he has never been back here before. However, he wasn't prepared for what he would see there. He found a group of captive human women, which proves that even in this world, Goblin Slayer was right all along. He's just going to try to ignore it, so he spends his time crafting a weapon instead. The goblin elder named Gabji comes over to him since he seems to be oddly motivated to survive. At this rate, he believes Gobro might level up faster than expected. Gobro didn't know there was a level system here, so Gabji tells him to tap his forehead so he can see it. After doing so, Gobro sees that the elder is currently at level 86, and he mentions that if one manages to reach level 100, then they'll be able to evolve into a higher being. However, goblins age so fast that even though he's only in his 20s, look way too old. As he leaves, he tells Gobro that he'll get to see what an evolved hobgoblin looks like when the promising youngsters return from the village, but something doesn't sit right with Gobro. The next day, it was clear out, so Gobro went out hunting with the other two. Their teamwork is outstanding considering they are only a week old, with Gobmi as backup, Gobro as their mid-range attacker, and Gobakishi as their forward. With this formation, they were able to get themselves a large haul of meat, and Gobmi is brought to tears as she takes a bite due to how thick and juicy it is. Gobro takes a bite as well, and he ends up learning several new skills from snake meat. The next day, they kept hunting, but by day 11, they made the mistake of going into an unknown cave, and they found themselves staring down a huge swarm of vampire bats. They immediately start running away, but the bats are too fast, so Gobakichi and Gobro stay behind to deal with them. They were getting overwhelmed at first, but then Gobro uses the evil eye skill he acquired and freezes all the bats in place. With all the bats frozen in place, they then proceed to kill all of them, and afterwards they dine on their corpses. Gobro gains some new skills from eating the bat meat, including echolocation, vamp up, vamphilia, and COVID-19. As they continue to eat like kings, they are watched by some of the other goblins, who are starving since they are too dumb to successfully hunt on their own. That night, they attempted to take their frustrations out on him since obviously, he's the one with the problem, not them. If they put this much effort into catching food, then maybe they wouldn't be so hungry, but they failed to account for the fact that Gobro has a search ability, so he could sense them approaching. He counterattacked them, and although he didn't really intend to kill anyone, he miscalculated on the amount of his venom skill to use, so one of the attacking goblins ended up dead. He didn't seem to care though, as he still wanted to teach them a lesson for trying to assassinate him. However, Gobmi shows up, and after what she did to them for attacking her precious Gobro, even Gobro feels sorry for them. The next day, they head out to hunt again and are planning a coordinated jumping on this orc. It was just minding its own business when they throw a rock in its eye, and while it's blinded, Gobakichi rushes in. The orc knocks him back with its pickaxe, but immediately after, its fingers get smashed by another rock. They then proceed to claim its kneecaps by inverting the bend of its knees with a club. And to finish off, Gobro stabs it in the head several times. After the orc has been killed, they enjoy its meat, but since they got a lot left over, Gobro decides they should take it all back to the cave, since there is something he wants to do. Once they brought all the excess back, Gobro calls the attention of all the broke and starving goblins and tells them that they can eat as much as they want as meat. After some initial hesitation, one after the other, all the goblins drop to their knees and begin gobbling up Gobro's delicious meat. As he watches them, Gobro thinks about how he would never have helped people out like this in his past life, but maybe being reincarnated changed more than just his body. That night, after everyone has gone to sleep, Gobro is laying down and trying to do the same, but the notifications in his head won't stop playing. It says he has exceeded the level requirement, so he will be evolving into a hobgoblin soon. However, he wasn't paying attention to it since he was so sleepy. The next morning, something strange happens as Gobro wakes up and discovers that he now looks different. He is confused why his appearance seems to have changed again overnight, plus he looks a lot more similar to the way he did before he reincarnated. And more importantly, he is no longer bald. The same thing seems to have happened to Gobakichi as well, and Gami, although she stayed the same, she is loving the new look on her friends. The elder comes over to see what all the commotion is about, and he is shocked to find that both Gobro and Gobakichi have managed to evolve when they were literally born 2 weeks ago. Gobakichi gets Gobro's attention and says he would like to test out how much stronger he has gotten. But hunting won't be enough to satisfy him, so he wants to have a fight with Gobro himself. Gobro is up for the challenge, so the two head out to begin their match. They both begin boxing out in the forest, and Gobakichi is definitely a whole lot stronger than he was before, but he still lacks the combat skills necessary to be able to take Gobro down in a fight, as Gobro is able to slip under a punch and sweep his legs out from under him. Gobakichi admits defeat and praises Gobro for being so strong, but Gobro gives him credit as well, since when it comes to power, Gobakichi is stronger than anyone else here. Just then, Gobro hears some wolf noises off in the distance, and he can tell that something bad is going to happen soon. He calls for Gami, who is hiding nearby, to spy on them, and tells her that she should go get the crossbow they had made earlier because they are going to be needing it soon. Wolves are chasing a bunch of rabbits down the hill, and once they have successfully killed their prey, they lock on to their next unsuspecting target, a probably innocent orc that was just minding his own business. The orc starts running for its life, but the wolves aren't about to let it get away so easily, so they start chasing it down until they eventually catch up and tear it to pieces. Gobro and Gobakichi watch this all go down, and they think the wolves will be the perfect opponent to test out how strong they have truly become since they evolved. Gobro signals to Gobmi to begin firing at the wolves with a crossbow, and once the leader is taken down, both Gobro and Gobakichi rush in to start smashing in the wolves. Without their leader, the wolves' teamwork was completely gone, so they were able to make quick work of them and slaughtered every single one. Afterwards, there was just the leader wolf left standing, but he too would eventually succumb to the wounds he sustained. After he collapsed, Gobro approached and opened his mouth to take a huge bite out of the wolf, allowing him to gain some extra skills, including one leadership skill. Gobro takes the rest of the dead wolves back to the cave and tells the other goblins that they are free to eat as much as they want, but from now on, he expects them to catch their own food. They don't have the confidence to accomplish something like that, so they all get down on their knees and beg Gobro to teach them how to hunt for themselves. He agrees to train them in the ways of hunting if they don't know how, and if they need weapons, he'll teach them how to make those as well. This gets everyone to like him a lot, so he is cemented in as the leader of the goblins. It may partially be because of his leadership skill, but that doesn't matter to him. He will work hard to lead his comrades, and he'll continue to eat and gain new skills as he goes, all for the sake of achieving his goal. Day 17. Gobro wakes Gobji up from his nap to inform him of an incident. All the human women whom they had locked in the basement realize that Goblin's Slayer isn't coming to save them. So rather than spending the rest of their lives as breeding slaves, they offer themselves with poison, so Gobro and Gobji hold a memorial and burn the bodies. By day 23, Gobro had begun training all the goblins in the ways of not sucking and being a goblin. And while he was doing this, he also spent some time hunting and eating any and all monsters that would provide him with useful skills, so he has got quite the arsenal of skills at his disposal now. Just then, he notices several figures approaching from a distance, and while they may look like goblins, he's not the type to trust strangers blindly, so he draws his sword and prepares to cut them down. However, he is stopped by Gobji, who tells him that those goblins are the fathers of the current generation of goblins, and they're home with the milk. Gobji is happy with the haul of food the old goblins returned with, and they also happen to capture some more women to be used for breeding, so Gobji is rather glad about that as well. Goblin DNA is so strong that even if they mate with other species, it will still result in a goblin baby, and while Gobro can understand the instinct to reproduce, he still has to admit that this is really messed up and he needs to do something about it. He goes over to the biggest hobgoblin of the older generation and asks if he can be in charge of taking care of the women, but the old goblin gets angry because he wanted to take them for himself. Gobro isn't one to back down, so a fight was about to break out between the two, and both generations were ready to jump in to help at a moment's notice. But before the bloodbath began, it got broken up by two other goblins. They would prefer it if they didn't cause a civil war to break out between the generations, so they suggest that the two people with beef settle it in a way that won't get them involved. These two are Hobsato and Hobsi, and they suggest that the leaders of both generations have a battle to settle the dispute, so the winner will get to decide what the village does from now on. They also make a rule banning weapons, so that no one ends up dying, and the older goblin agrees to the term, not knowing he's about to get his ass beat. And a couple minutes later, we see clear evidence that the older goblin indeed got his ass beaten. Gobro has him tied up in a spider's web, but he assures everyone that this doesn't count as cheating, since the webs aren't a weapon. He produces it from his body like Toby's Spider-Man thanks to a skill he got earlier, so with the current alpha tied up and beaten, Gobro has been crowned the new leader of the village, and no one dares to object because they don't want to end up like the old leader. Later, Gobro goes and tells the captured women that he has instructed all the goblins not to lay a hand on them, and he won't be touching them either, so they have nothing to worry about. He'll make sure they are well taken care of, and eventually he'll see to it that they are sent back to a human village. The girls are relieved to hear that they will be alright, but there has to be some kind of catch to a deal like this, so one asks Gobro what he wants them to do in exchange for their freedom. Gobro does feel bad for them, but that's not the only reason he chose to help them out. He has no other way to get any information on the matter, so he tells them that all he wants is to learn about the human world here. So after talking with them for a bit, he finds out that these women were part of a traveling merchant group, but when they were attacked by the goblins, all their men were slaughtered, and these 5 were the only ones who survived the attack, only to be captured and brought here. They start to cry after being forced to relive the tragedy they went through, but it's not like Gobro can say, "Sorry, my people wiped out your friends and family," so he just gets up and walks away. A couple days pass, and the women seem to be more cheerful regarding their current situation, but it's probably just their way of coping. From the time he has spent with them, he has learned that humans in this world don't evolve the same way monsters do, but in exchange, they are able to take on multiple jobs. The red-haired one seems to be a rookie adventurer as far as Gobro can tell, but she's pretty weak as far as warriors go, so he may have her join the goblins in training later. Speaking of training, Gobro made all the older goblins join in on the training as well, and it doesn't matter how old they are. If they get pissy with him, he's going to smack some sense into them. For the next few days, Gobro focused on group exercises so that he could teach all the goblins the new rules he had set for them, and you can tell the former leader is not happy about it, but he can't go against Gobro's decisions anymore. On the 31st day, it was rainy, so everyone stayed inside. Everything was perfectly normal, but then Gobro's detection skill alerted him to some goblins heading towards the human women, and he knows what that means. The former leader has gathered a couple of his buddies, and they were planning to have some fun with the humans, but Gobro shows up behind them, and he distinctly remembers spending a couple days going over the rules with them. But it looks like some people never learn, so he's going to have to teach the old man another lesson. The women wake up to the sound of Gobro killing one of the insubordinate goblins, and they are obviously scared. The other goblins had heard the commotion and rushed in to see what happened, so Gobro asks Gobmi to help him drag all the goblins he tied up outside and to tell everyone to gather around because there's something he wants to show them. That night in the pouring rain, Gobro proceeded to beat the rule-breaking goblins to death, leaving the former leader to suffer the worst fate as Gobro's personal punching bag until he was just barely alive, only to be left out in the rain to die a slow and painful death. With this, Gobro asks if everyone understands the rules and what will happen if they break the rules, and no one dares to say a word. The next day, it's back to the regular hunting, and the group is up against a trekhorn with scales that make it almost really difficult to pierce. The trekhorn charges at Gobro, but he uses his spider silk to trap it in place, and with it immobilized, both he and Gobakichi were able to target its weak points and kill it fairly easily. After it has been defeated, Gobro and the others eat the meat, and he gains several new skills, one of which is a skill called Triple Strike, and even though he is doing it himself, Gobro still has no idea how the extra 2 strikes are being generated, but he's not going to question it. That night, while Gobro was in bed, the red-haired human came up to him and just climbed into bed with him. Nothing unholy took place that night because she was probably still just scared from what had happened the previous night, so Gobro let her sleep in his bed. However, by morning time, Gami had gotten jealous, so she climbed into Gobro's bed as well. In other news, the goblin Gobro had assigned to be carrying all the equipment managed to evolve as well due to all the manual labor, so she is now relevant to the plot as well. The training of the goblins has been divided into different units, with Gobakichi handling the armored units, Gobmi handling the ranged units, and Hobsato handling the regular fighters. And now that Gob has evolved, she handles the training of the support goblins. Meanwhile, Hobse is busy doing absolutely nothing because she is the only mage among the goblins, meaning there's no one for her to train. Gobro decided to leave the training of the goblins to the appointed captains while he heads deep into the forest to hunt some strong prey. While there, he spots another trekhorn in the distance, and since he has the element of surprise, he decides to try using a magic skill he had acquired previously, casting Phase 1 Demise Magic. And once his attack hits, the trekhorn that they had had so much trouble defeating earlier was easily destroyed in a split second. That landslide victory may have made him a little too overconfident because he then decided further north into the forest, but only once he had gone in really deep did he remember what Gobji had told him a couple days after he was born last month. He was explicitly warned never to go into the northern part of the forest, because in there lives a crimson creature called the Red Bear, and now he has come face to face with said Red Bear due to his carelessness. Any rational being would have already started running away, but even though he can't guarantee it, Gobro still believes that he may be able to take this thing down if he comes up with a plan. He wants to kill and eat the bear to gain even more skills, so he activates his Demise Magic and gets ready to throw everything he has at the bear. Back at the cave, Gobmi is getting worried since she hasn't seen Gobro all day, and neither has anyone else since he left their training session that morning. But the others aren't really worried since Gobro is strong enough that he'll probably be fine even if he gets himself into trouble. But I don't know if he has a plan for this because the bear managed to dodge the attacks. It lost an arm in the process, but it's still every bit as dangerous as it was before, so Gobro can tell that if he gets hit by one of those claw strikes, even the refined scales armor skill he got from the Tricorn Wind be of any use to him. Just as he can't afford to take a single hit, he resolves to kill the bear as soon as possible. However, even after striking it in the skull with an axe, the bear still keeps chugging along, so Gobro is forced to step back and try something different. He attempts to use his spider webs to trap the bear, but is too strong for that and breaks itself free. The bear then activates one of its own skills and launches a wave of fire at Gobro, which sets the whole forest ablaze. The bear begins walking away since it assumes there is no way Gobro survived that attack. But despite that blast of fire being around 2,000 degrees hot, Gobro still managed to survive, so after getting to cover, he begins healing his arm while he thinks about his situation. He has never heard of such a thing as a fire-breathing bear before, so it looks like in order to take this thing down, he is going to have to be willing to take some amount of damage. He heads back out as the bear is leaving and baits it into launching a fire blast at him once again. But this time, he has come up with a plan to counter it and uses water magic to block the inferno, while he continues to charge forward. The bear's body is too hard to pierce normally from the outside, but it's probably a different story when it comes to the inside of the bear's mouth, so Gobro stabs his sword through the bear's mouth, leading to a wound which he assumes will be fatal. However, he gets snapped out of his confident smirk when the bear smacks him across the forest and into a tree. Gobro managed to take an arm from the bear, slash it across the head, and stab it through its mouth, but is still showing no signs of collapsing. However, after that one strike, Gobro is on the verge of death and will definitely croak if he takes another one of those hits. But that just makes it more exciting for him. He charges back in and raises his axe to strike the bear, while the bear readies its claws to strike as well. But once the clash is over, one of Gobro's arms is seen flying through the air. The bear had indeed managed to rip his arm off, but at the end of the day, Gobro was still alive, even if he is barely a step above passing out dead. He grabs the bear claw that is impaling him and takes a bite out of it, gaining 2 new abilities, but he succumbs to his wounds and passes out afterward. He then receives a notification that the level requirements have been reached, so he is allowed to evolve into a rare ogre class, which he immediately accepts. After some time, he wakes up and finds he has evolved yet again. His hand is regenerating. Thus, when he returns to the other goblins, they are all in shock by how he has become. Gabi scolds him for being away and making them worry. She tries to leg kick him, but our boy stands there and takes it like a man while Gabi drops to the floor screaming in pain. Since Gobro became an ogre, Gabi had been following him around non-stop, but before he addresses that, he wants to get himself a change of clothes. As he enters the storage room, the women are frightened because they don't recognize him at first, but after he shows them his skills as proof of his identity, they calm down a bit. One of the human girls takes a look at an axe that's been heavily damaged, which she seems happy to fix, and while Gobro is here, she informs him that she made a knife out of a magic stone, so she would like him to check it out. Gobro is impressed by all her hard work, so he gives her a pat on the head, and Stockholm Syndrome must be hitting her hard because she loves it. On the other hand, Gabi and the redhead girl hate it as they are jealous that Gobro is giving another girl his attention. Gobro then goes over to the twins to see how they are doing, but the work they have to do is a bit much for just the 2 of them to handle, so they ask Gobro if they can get a few extra hands to help. Since they asked, Gobro decides that he can tell a couple of the goblin girls to come help over here, and the twins are happy to hear it, but even Gobro is amazed how quickly they started liking goblins despite literally having their entire family killed by them a week ago. He jokes that they would make great wives, and the girls don't seem like they are opposed to the idea, but Redhead and Gabi certainly are. Next, he goes to check on the green-haired girl who has been busy making potions. He takes a look at one of the vials and he can tell it is poison, which the girl doesn't deny. She had made it for protection and was initially planning to squad wipe all the goblins by poisoning the food, but then she learned that there were trustworthy goblins like him, so she doesn't intend to use it anymore. The next day, Gobro realized that he could no longer do his regular training because in his ogre state, even holding back against the other goblins nearly kills them, so he'll refrain from fighting them anymore. Gobakichi takes the loss really hard and decides to go hunting to clear his head, and while Gobro is worried about him, he also knows he's got to give him some alone time. The rest of the day was spent with everyone going through their normal routines, and for once Gobro got a chance to just relax as he passed the time by sewing next to Hobbsy. Even though he lost an arm in his fight with the red bear, it hasn't really slowed him down all that much since he has a slime skill to make up for it. But that aside, he tells Hobbsy that he would like to get his book back so he can finish reading it, but she just ignores him completely and just keeps reading it. The next day, Gobro was casually eating lunch when Gob came running to him with an injured carbuncle in her arms. Gobro tries healing it first, but it has lost a lot of blood, so he says he'll have to ask the alchemist to make something to help her. After the treatment is done, the carbuncle wakes up and is confused about her current situation and who all these strange people around her are. They explain everything to her, So the carbuncle is grateful to them for saving her life even though she is a stranger to them. She says her name is Returner and she was attacked by some humans not too long ago, which is how she ended up in that state. Apparently, the gemstone in the forehead of a carbuncle is worth a lot of money, approximately 1 billion gold coins, so it's no wonder that they are trying so hard to kill her for it. She asks Gobro to please help her chase away the adventurers that are after her because she is not going to live much longer. Returner is an artificial carbuncle created by a legendary wizard long ago with the purpose of guarding the treasure of said wizard. However, during the attack, the core that keeps her alive was heavily damaged, so there's no way she'll survive much longer at this rate. Her master held a major grudge against humans while he was alive, so even in death, he would rather let his legendary treasures go to a bunch of goblins rather than let humans get their grubby little mitts on them. So if Gobro helps her get rid of those adventurers, then she'll gladly hand over all the contents of the treasury to him. This is a golden opportunity, so Gobro's not going to let it slip through his fingers so easily. He calls for everyone to gather around and tells them all that they will be going to this treasury today to chase away some humans. He asks the blacksmith girl if she has the spirit stone knife she was talking about the other day, so she gives it to him. He doesn't normally use a knife, but he thinks it would be better than going in empty-handed if his goal is to intimidate them. The goblin squad all head into the treasury the carbuncle talked about, and once inside, Gobro asked Gobakichi and the others to hide first so he could try to negotiate with humans. He walked around looking for the adventurers on his own. But then those same adventurers cornered him out of nowhere. They grumble amongst themselves about having it deal with an ogre as well now, but they just decide to get rid of it as quickly as possible. An assassin tries to go in for a stealthy kill, but Gobro sees it comes a mile away and is able to block the strike with his bare hand. The adventurers are shocked that the assassin's concealment was seen through so easily, but then Gobro interrupts them and yells that they are in someone else's home right now, but they are trying to steal from it and even nearly killed its guardian. And on top of that, they don't seem to think there's anything wrong with what they are doing. But they are in luck today because Gobro is a nice guy and will give them a chance to spare themselves some pain. They start attacking him, but they are so weak that he can dodge their strikes effortlessly, so he still gives them the offer to turn around and walk away before things get ugly. Unfortunately, humans are known for their sudden lack of brain cells when thinking is necessary, so despite the fact that Gobro is very clearly out of their league, they keep attacking until he finally loses patience and is ready to crack some heads. It is finally starting to sink in for the adventurers that they shouldn't have messed with Gobro, but it's already too late to go back as Gobro uses his earth magic to trap them in place and calls for the others to begin jumping these guys. After they were done beating up the adventurers, they stripped them of everything they had on them and kicked them all out. So Gobro decides to eat all the loot and ends up gaining the skills of the items as well. He is now able to summon an item box that can store over 100,000 items in it. Since he has held up his end of the bargain, Returner leads Gobro and the others to the treasure room where her master took his final breaths amongst all of his cool stuff. This was the great wizard, Velvet, and Returner says he was quite well versed in conversing with the spirits, which is why he was able to gather such a large quantity of spirit stones. Her time has come to an end, so she once again thanks Gobro and the others for their help and disappears in his hand, leaving behind her head gem, which Gobro eats. They all take a moment of silence for Returner. But after that's fine, they start looting the place for anything that looks like it could be valuable, and his new item box came in handy with this part. But before they left, Gobro felt bad about leaving the body out in the open like this, so he decides it would be best if he burned it. And as he does so, the body turns to ash, leaving behind a gauntlet, which Gobro doesn't hesitate to put on. The gauntlet seems to be a legendary magic item, so once he equips it on his lost arm, it attaches itself to him and replaces his missing arm. The arm has some really cool features, including the ability to rotate as well as produce poison and strings. But most importantly, it can function like a regular hand as well. The next day, Gobro spent a lot of time assessing all the gear they got from the treasury, and considering it was collected by a legendary wizard, everything is top of the line in power, so the following day, Gobro distributed the magic items to the 15 hobgoblins among the group. He kept this vermilion spear as well as a legendary magic bracelet for himself, so in total, he now has 3 legendary magic items all to himself. On day 40, Gobro decided to hold a series of battles to determine the ranks among the different hobgoblins. The day after that, Gobro headed out early in the morning to go hunt some prey he has never fought before. First was the golden spider, which he took out in one punch, and after eating its meat, he received another skill that allows him to create golden threads. As he continues walking through the forest, he ends up under a tree that's bathed in light, and this is kind of a problem for him since this is the home of a species called dryads. They prey on the men of intelligent races and seduce them into becoming a nutrient supply. Gobji had told Gobro about them, and he personally wants to go out while being sucked dry by a dryad. But Gobro would never go for something so lecherous. Or at least that's what he tells himself, because the second a dryad appears and starts getting up close and personal, Gobro merely folds on the spot. He tries to think about this calmly, but then he remembers that he is still a virgin in this world, so all reason gets thrown out the window as Gobro activates his sacred skill, the Golden PP. The dryad is amazed by the length and girth of what she sees before her, and I can't get into detail, but a lot of stuff happened within the next 5 hours. And by the time they were done, the dryad was asking him to come back again soon for another round. Gobro then heads over to a nearby waterfall to wash himself off, but he was soon surrounded by a squad of lizardmen for no reason. So he killed them, along with everything else that tried to attack him. The next day, Gobro found out there were 2 goblins who had the ability to become mages, so he sent them to be trained under Habze. But he can't say he likes the look on her face when she thinks about getting to teach other goblins. In other news, all the girls in the cave are suddenly mad at Gobro, and he can't figure out why since none of them will tell him. He ends up going to the green-haired girl to ask for some advice since she seems to be the most level-headed person here. So she tells him that everyone is mad because they know he went to Pound Town recently. The dryad left some very recognizable marks on his body, so they are jealous that he didn't choose them first. The green-haired girl feels the same way as well, but rather than take the jealous, silent treatment approach, she chooses to be a little more proactive with her feelings. We've already seen that Gobro folds easier than a blanket in these kinds of situations, but Gobmi refuses to let it happen. At least not unless she gets to join in as well, and everyone else has the same thoughts. A lot more happened that day which required Gobro to put up a soundproof wall in his room, but he doesn't want to talk about it. The next morning, Gobro's detection skill alerts him to the approach of some enemies, and thanks to his skill improving, he is now able to identify the race and general strength of an opponent. He heads outside with Gobakichi and is confronted by a couple of elves who seem like they are going to be a real pain in the ass to deal with. They have a proposal to make, but the elves are being really high and mighty about it considering the proposal is them asking for help. The elves' territory is about to be attacked by humans who wish to steal their treasure, so he wants to have the goblins fight to help defend against the attack. And in exchange, they'll be provided compensation. Gobji immediately thinks this is a good idea to help them since the compensation amounts to a couple of months' worth of food for the whole village. But while that may be true, Gobro still refuses the request regardless. The elves are shocked he would turn down what they thought was an unbeatable deal like this, but Gobro couldn't care less about their situation. And while he normally wouldn't be opposed to helping them out, their pompous demeanor irks him, so he wants nothing to do with them. The elf is angered and nearly draws his sword on Gobro, but Gobro immediately uses Conqueror's Haki and brings the elf leader to his knees with the immense pressure. After this, he grabs the elf leader's neck and tells him to call off the archers surrounding this place if he wishes to continue having a non-crushed neck, and he isn't bluffing either. One of the archers attempts to fire an arrow into Gobro's head, but he catches it with his teeth and bites until it shatters to pieces. Gobro was turning down their offer partially because he's not in the mood to fight humans, but if they threaten his goblin village as well, then he might reconsider teaming up with the elves. But with that said, he uses his legendary spear to make it clear that he could kill everyone here in a second if he wanted to, but he'll let them go today. All the elves make a hasty retreat back to their tribe, and Gobro is sure they won't return here for a while after a scare like that. Or at least he hopes so. The next day, while out hunting, Gobro comes across a gray slime, so he defeats it with some fire magic and picks up its core so he can munch on it. After eating the slime, Gobro unlocks the abilities of physical damage resistance, fluid regeneration, and auto-replication. Auto-replication is an ability that allows Gobro to create a copy of himself using any of his body fluids. He tests it out by using a drop of his blood, and after a few seconds, a mini Gobro is formed. He is able to share his senses with this miniature version of himself, so he comes up with the idea to have clothes made for all the women he cares about, but with his blood mixed into the lining so that it can act as a way to contact him if they are ever in trouble. The next day, Gobro had one of his blood children keeping a lookout for any suspicious behavior, and it just so happened to see the elves approaching once more, but this time it looks like the leader has brought a whole army with him this time. It seems like he didn't learn his lesson last time, so Gobro is done with mercy for now. As the elves approach the entrance of the cave, they are immediately immobilized by Gobro's roar, after which he steps out and uses his webs to tie all of them up. The prisoners are all brought inside, where Gobro gives the leader one last chance to make it out of this by asking him why he came back here. But the leader just keeps digging his grave deeper and declares that he will kill Gobro for wounding his pride. Some of the elf girls apologize for their leader's foolishness, since they tried to talk him out of coming here, but he refused to listen to them at all. Since it's not entirely the troops' fault that their leader is an idiot, he decides that they will fight one-on-one mock battles against the goblins here, and all the elves that win their battles will be spared. Although the leader is going to be killed no matter what, long story short, of the 23 elf soldiers, only 6 were defeated, and Gobro may or may not have rigged the matches so that all the male elves lost so that he would have the elf girls to himself, but that's besides the point. He eats all the elf men, gaining some extra skills from them, and now that that's done, he addresses the surviving elf women and tells them that they all need to surrender their weapons and magic items because they are being held as prisoners now. The elf girls are shocked because they thought they would be set free if they won their mock battles, but Gobro isn't so kind as to forgive people who came here with the intent of killing him. Gobji is already thrusting in excitement since he believes he will finally get to go balls deep with some elf girls, but Gobro imposes the no-touch rule again, so the elves won't have to worry about any other goblins. Gobji can accept it since Gobro is the boss in the village, but Gobji still asks if he can get some action since he's so pent and Gobro feels kind of bad for him. Gobro still has to execute the elf leader, and he's got something special planned for him. Later on, Gobakichi reaches level 100 while out hunting, and as a result he evolves into a more powerful version of himself. The rest of the goblins are in awe of his new physique, especially Gobro, who is glad he has someone on his level once more. Gobokichi has become a special variant as well, and his iron-hard crimson skin is a result of blessings from the demigod of flame and war. So he's become really tough, and the first thing he wants to do now that he has evolved is spar with Gobro, to which Gobro is more than happy to take him up on that offer. They begin sparring, and Gobakichi is definitely able to take a few hits from Gobro, but ultimately he still lacks the skills to really contend and gets defeated fairly easily. While Gobro may have won the battle, he is still impressed with Gobakichi for catching up to him in the first place, so he is glad he has a rival to keep him on his toes. Afterward, Gobro feels exhausted from all the fighting he had done with Gobakichi, so he takes a break in the cave. But he is then approached by a shadowy figure which apologizes for not being able to prepare more for him and gives him an unknown skill. Gobro wakes up from the encounter, and it turns out to have been a weird dream, but he is still left wondering what it could have meant. On day 51, Gog drags Gobro over so he can get a good look at all the progress the goblins have been making while he wasn't paying attention. Maybe it's because they felt left behind after Gobakichi became an ogre as well, but 4 more goblins have become hobgoblins. One has been assessed to have enough talent to become a mage, while another seems to have the talents necessary to become a cleric. This is Gogji, and he promises to do his best to help the goblin community as much as possible. And in other news, Habza got even hotter. She has evolved into a half-spell lord, but she's got some markings on her body which reminds Gobro of the marks he has, but they leave that discussion for later as Habzi is itching to test out how much extra power she has gained from her evolution. So they both head outside where Habzi casts a volley of flame spells which set the forest ablaze. The two ignore the forest fire they just started, and Habzi says she feels like she could cast another 20 spells just like that, but before she can cause any more collateral damage, Gobro says that's enough for today. With her being a half-spell lord, she isn't as strong as she would be as full-spell lord, but she is likely going to evolve into one next time. However, for now, to celebrate her evolution, Gobro presents her with some new legendary gear. The rate at which goblins have been evolving seems really high compared to how it normally goes, and Gobro is mostly certain that it's because of his influence on the way the goblins train, but even though the general population has grown stronger, there are still those who aren't able to keep up. Later on, Gobro and Gobakichi are returning from a successful hunt, when they run into a group of the older generation goblins, and they say they have had enough of living in the goblin village since they are the older ones, but all the goblins that are 2 months old are getting stronger than them. And on top of that, Gobro is the only one who ever gets laid, so they want to leave and start something new for themselves. To their surprise, Gobro has no issues with them leaving since they didn't steal any stuff, and he even goes out of his way to provide them with a knife made of mithril to help them with their journey. On another occasion, Gobro came across an orc that was dragging a human body home. The guy is already dead, so there's nothing Gobro could do to save him, so he kills the orc to avenge him. And while he may have a rule against killing humans unless absolutely necessary, he still takes a bite out of the dead guy to see what he gets. He manages to acquire a monster tamer skill from him. Later, Gobro is working on an idea to make earrings with his blood in them so he can communicate with others, so once they are completed, the earrings are implemented in training. Gobro talks to Gobmi through the earring, and she is amazed that she can actually hear him loud and clear. So with confirmation that the idea works, he made enough for all the goblins to use. As the day progressed, hunting went on as usual, and Gog seems to have gotten a lot stronger since she is now able to knock out a Trihorn in one blow. Since it is still in one piece, Gobro thinks this is a perfect subject to try out his new Monster Tamer skill on, and once he's done, the Trihorn is made into a loyal pet for Gami. Gobro goes on to tame a lot more animals over the course of that day. On the 59th day, Gobro sets things up so that the red-haired girl can train by fighting kobolds one-on-one. She sits down for a break with Gobro, and as he is eating, she asks if she can have a bit of his meat. Gobro doesn't mind and hands her the drumstick, but as she takes a bite from it, she pauses for a moment because she just unlocked a new job class. Her job is called Nor Soldat, and it gives her boosts that allow her to move like this, with the only caveat being that she needs to eat monster meat occasionally or she will die. That night, Gobro is woken up when his detection skill alerts him to dozens of kobolds heading this way. They are being chased by something, but he can't tell what it is, so for now, he has all the goblins ready to defend against whatever threat may be coming and tells them to leave the kobolds alone since they are the victims in this case. As the kobolds run past them, it is revealed that they were being chased by magically animated skeletons, so Gobro ordered Gobmi and her team to open fire. They do as instructed, but the arrows have no effect on the skeletons, and at this rate, they are going to end up getting overrun. There is clearly something creating these skeletons, so they'll need to take it out if they want this to end, but for now, Gobro tells everyone to drop their weapons and throw hands because smashing the skeletons is the only way to slow them down. Smashing the skeleton works, but they can't keep this up forever if the skeletons don't stop coming, and this is where Gobro comes in because he is going after the one creating the skeletons. He dashes for the entrance while ripping through the skeleton horde in front of him, so after only 7 seconds, he finally gets to the greater skeleton that is summoning the rest of the skeletons and punches a hole through it. Once the main skeleton has been defeated, Gobro takes a bite out of its head, which gives him a bunch of new undead skills, and as he returns to the cave, he is greeted by all the kobolds who have now started referring to him as their lord. The kobolds were out mining when they accidentally dug into Velvet's treasury and set off its guardian, a greater skeleton. So the only thing they could think of to survive was to run for the cave of the terrifying ogre they've been trying to avoid. Their story makes sense to Gobro, but he reminds them that he has been killing a lot of their kind for a while now. So are they really sure they still want him as their lord? But the kobolds are fully aware and want to serve him regardless. At this point, Gobro has gathered humans, elves, and kobolds, so while he didn't intend for it at first, he admits that things have gotten pretty interesting around here. The next day, Gobro went out hunting with Govakichi for the first time in a while, but as they were heading into the forest, they spotted a team of 12 humans moving through the forest quickly, so Gobro changed plans and decided that they should follow the humans. They chase after the humans quietly, and by eavesdropping, Gobro is able to learn that the humans are planning to kidnap the daughter of the elf chief. Their target is the group of elves that will be returning from a festival today, and they got the necessary information from traders among the elf tribe. 2 hours after sunset, the convoy arrives, and Gobro is stunned by how beautiful the elf princess is, even by elf standards. But then the human attack begins, and 2 elves of the convoy immediately get headshot. Govakichi wants to go help them, but Gobro stops him since this fight has nothing to do with him. The humans then proceed to take the elves down, and when they finally grab the princess, Gobro changes his mind and decides to save them. But totally not because he sees a chance to add a new member to his harem. After taking down the humans, Gobro and Govakichi grab all the bodies of the survivors and carry them back to the cave, where one of the captured humans confesses everything he knows so that Gobro will spare him. Apparently, the war with the elves is going to begin within 20 days, but while that information was definitely useful, the soldier is unfortunately a man, so he isn't eligible for the harem. In unrelated news, Gobro gains the skills of several soldiers, and then he turns to Elf Princess who had just woken up. She is scared the first time she sees Gobro, and she seems to be a bit different from the other elves since she has wings. She is confused about everything that happened, so he tries to calm her down by saying he won't hurt her, but she was more concerned about getting back shots from him. After Gobro clears up the misunderstanding, he sits down and has some tea with the princess. But she is pissed that Gobro just hid in the bushes and watched her men get killed before deciding to do anything. It's reasonable for her to be angry about his actions, but then again, Gobro does not care. He doesn't like getting involved in quarrels between the humans and goblins unless there is a pretty girl involved, of course. Besides, if she's got time to be crying over her dead men, then she would be better off using it to find the traitors among her people who ratted out her location. The news that some of her people may be traitors only makes her cry even more, so Gobro tells her to get some rest for tonight, and in the morning, they'll escort her back to her tribe. On a side note, Gobje is still as down bad as before, but Gobro won't let him go anywhere near the elf princess. The next morning, Gobro leaves early to escort the princess back to the elf tribe, And while they are walking, he asks about her wings and is told that they are something that only high elves have. This is an evolved version of an elf who is able to fly with the wings, although the princess says the wings are usually hidden within their bodies, so outsiders don't see them often. After that, they continue walking for another 3 hours until they finally reach the elf village, but they are immediately held at arrow point by dozens of elves in the trees. And these guys aren't messy around because their arrows are made of mithril and would be a serious threat to Gobro, although he could probably handle a couple of shots. The elf princess steps up and tells the archers to back off since Gobro and Gobakichi are the ones who saved her. The archers are confused, but eventually Gobro and Gobakichi are allowed to meet with the village chief. The chief thanks Gobro for saving his daughter since she is the most important thing to him, but Gobro cuts straight to the chase and says he didn't save her out of kindness or anything, he wants a reward. The village chief believes it is fitting to reward the man who returned his daughter to him safely, so he calls for an attendant to bring over a magic item. The item is called Failna, and it is an heirloom of the elf family, so the princess asks if he is sure he really wants to give that up, but he believes it is decent compensation for the service Gobro has done him. Gobro is glad to see that the elf chief isn't a cheapskate when it comes to things that matter, so he tells the chief that he has some information that may be useful regarding the upcoming war with the humans. Upon hearing this, the chief realizes that this may be a mutually beneficial relationship he is going with Gobro, and as additional compensation, Gobro is given some mithril materials, some weapons, and 2 shovels, which probably do something special. After the deal was made, the chief says he has something he wants to ask Gobro about. It has been a long time since the elite troop of elves went out, and he hasn't heard back from them, so he was wondering if Gobro knew anything about that. Gobro knows who the chief is referring to, but since he already killed and eaten most of the team, he nervously laughs while denying any involvement with them. The chief has no reason to believe Gobro is lying, so he accepts what he says, but before they leave, he gives Gobro an extra gift. Several barrels of alcohol, and that was all Gobro needed to be willing to help them out if they are ever in trouble again. Back at the cave, Gobro is really enjoying the alcohol, so he intends to do everything in his power to stay on friendly terms with the elves. And the others are glad to see that he is happy, but Gobmi feels something off about herself today. By the next morning, Gobro gets out of bed and he tries waking Gobmi up, but he finds that she has evolved into a damper overnight. So after getting herself a new change of clothes, she's finally able to show off to Gobro. With her evolution, she is now able to create large amounts of ice, which is a useful ability, but she also needs to wear magic-blocking glasses because she also acquired an evil eye that makes others fight among themselves. In other news, Go became a half-Earth lord with abilities that allow her to manipulate Earth, spot weaknesses in bedrock, and play Minecraft without a pickaxe. Hobsetto has also evolved, but in her case, she's become a half-blood lord, and as such, she is able to control blood and use it as a weapon. But Gobro is still a bit curious about how all the evolved hobgoblins have the same kinds of marks on their bodies that he does. And they all say they feel their power emanating from that spot, so Gobro wants to look into this further when he gets the chance. With all the new evolutions that have been happening, Gogji decides to rename them, so now Hobsetto will be known as Bloodsetto, Gobmi as Dami, Gob as Earth, and Hobsi as Spelsi. He also renames Gobakichi as Ograkichi and Gobro as Ogro. He doesn't really like the new name, but all that matters is that everyone knows who's who, so he leaves it at that. With the new evolutions, the chart of the most powerful races in the cave has been updated, and Dami is at the top of the list right now. Once the war with the humans begins, the elves will turn to Ogro for help, and when that time comes, having more subordinates at his disposal will allow him to engage in more tactical operations. With that being the case, he began to distribute more of his communication earrings among the different species, but when it came to the elves, they were unwilling to put anything on unless Ogro put something in. So for the rest of that night, the soundproof room was put to good use. With everyone now on board with the training, the size of the daily training group has grown rather large, so Ogro came up with an idea to have them all fighting in controlled matches with an undead he creates, so they all can gain some experience. The skeleton he summons has dark bones and heavy armor, which indicates that it is powerful based on the equipment it spawns with. All the elves end up losing to the skeleton in battle. The undead were useful as training dummies, but the fact that they burn up as soon as they are exposed to sunlight really doesn't leave many options on how to use them during the day. For now, Ogro is focusing his efforts on training the elves and kobolds to improve their skills, especially the kobolds, since they are currently pretty low on the power scaling board, so if they don't get their act together, it's going to be hard for them to keep up. The next day, he has the kobolds practice group hunting, and honestly, they did a lot better than he expected them to because they managed to catch 20 wolves in one session, so they were able to tame them with his skill. After returning to the cave, Obru was pleasantly surprised to find that his axe that was damaged in the fight against the Red Bear has been upgraded. The entire thing has been modified with all kinds of mithril alloys and spirit stones, so Ogru is really impressed with her work. He asks when she learned how to make stuff like this, so she explains that she recently ranked up to an elemental smith, and for her achievement, she wants a special reward from Ogru. The next day, they were meant to go out for some additional training, but Abrakichi has something important he wants to discuss with Ogru. He asks Ogru to swear not to laugh at him, but he has always had a crush on Earthy, and now that she's become an Earth Lord, that voluptuous body is making him feel some type of way. However, he has no idea how to talk to her, so he really needs Obro's help with this one, and Obro feels like his time has finally come to be a big brother. Obro teaches Abrakichi everything there is to know about getting the girl, but he's got to do it tonight. There's no point in leaving it for later, and if he ends up getting rejected anyway, the worst she can say is no. He tells Abrakichi to let him know how it goes with Earthy, and after Abrakichi confesses to her, long story short, he gets laid. The next morning, Abrakichi is fighting with Obro again, and today he's feeling a lot lighter than before and is much happier, all thanks to Ogro's advice. After training as usual, they head out to begin hunting, and today there are a bunch of new insect monsters that Obro had never seen before, so he wanted to gather as many as possible to help make some armor plating. He also eats some as well and is able to acquire the skill of exoskeleton. So he tries it out, and his body is immediately covered in really tough armor. It holds up well against strikes, and it repairs minor damage quickly as well, so it would be really useful in battle. But he doesn't like how obvious it looks, so he takes it off. Unfortunately, it looks like the armor was created using his clothes, so that jacket is just gone now. But this also teaches Ogro that he is able to register and recall forms that may be useful to him. So after getting some new pants, he creates an aerial form using some beetle skills he had acquired, and with it, he is now able to fly, although it's going to take some practice before he is really good at it. The following day, it rained, so no one could go out at all. However, that didn't stop the redhead from asking Obro to train with her. He used to think of her as a cute puppy, but now she's more like a Doberman with how powerful she has become. After training, Obru headed over to the blacksmith to see how things are going on her end, and lately she's been working with the elves to develop more interesting weapons with mithril. For example, she developed a new rapid-fire crossbow, and Obru is really impressed with the work she has put in. After that, he went to go check on the chef sisters, and their skills have improved as well, so Obru attempts to get them to recreate some foods from his past life like potato chips, and the sisters are more than happy to try anything he suggests. Next up on his checklist is a check-in with the alchemist to see how her research on potions and magic tools is going, and she seems to have created a magic item that can freeze a person in place if they are hit with it, and she is really proud of her creation, so she wants a reward from him. However, the other girls catch wind of this reward, so Obro has to spend the entire night with them. The next day, Obru gets called because there are some strange elves at the entrance to the cave, so he heads out and meets this elf who asks to have a chat with him. He's here to ask for Obro's assistance because the human army is advancing into the forest, and since he is being much nicer than the last guy, and the compensation is bound to be worthwhile, so Obru accepts the request. Later, he gathers all the strongest forces he has at his disposal and tells them that from this day forward, they are now a mercenary group, and they shall be called the Parabellum Mercenary Company, so it is time for them to head out on their first job. Early in the morning of day 71, they all head out on their first official mission as Parabellum, and for the special occasion, Obru decided to have 36 of them partake. With Spelcy's ability, they were also able to bring along their familiars, so in reality, there are more like 73 attackers in this group. The reason they made their move so early in the morning is because one of Obro's blood scouts managed to locate a human army encampment, so that will be their primary target for today. The group arrives at the encampment and they come across a barrier that has been detected around the camp. It is made to keep all monsters out, so Spelcy suggests that they destroy it immediately so they can begin their attacks. To that end, Obru orders everyone to get into position and surround the barrier in preparation for their slaughter, and once they are all in their optimal spots, he uses his gauntlet to fire an arrow which shatters the barrier in an instant. All the human soldiers are left in a state of confusion after they witness their protective barrier crumble to pieces, but they are in for much worse as Earthy creates a rock wall to prevent them from escaping. And now that the humans are trapped, Dami and Spelcy carpet bomb them with powerful magic attacks. And just to be really sure that every human here dies, Obru summons a ton of skeleton soldiers and begins spamming his anti-barrier arrows at the soldiers. However, even with the insane number of attacks that they were just hit with, the human side isn't simply going to give up, so they launch their own counterattack and take down a few of the skeletons. Obru first spots the female knight commander for the humans, and he is already considering having her join his harem if he gets the chance, But before any of that, he wants to have a good battle, so he lets out a loud roar to draw all attention to him. Once the Knight Commander spots Ogru, she orders her troops to concentrate their attacks on him since he is the one controlling the army of undead. Her troops then begin making a path for her to get to Ogru, and as the commander charges forward, one of the soldiers casts a buff in her to allow her to move through the horde quickly. Ogru realizes the commander has good situational awareness and her decision-making skills aren't bad either since she's trying to go straight for Ogru's heart. Although that doesn't mean the attack will work on him though. The Knight Commander is repelled and thrown several feet back into the arms of her troops. After everything he has seen from her, Ogru has made the decision that she will be a fine addition to his harem, so he is going to capture her alive rather than simply kill her. The commander doesn't like Ogru's condescending tone, so she states that she will kill him instead. Her fiery spirit just makes Ogru like her even more, so he now wants her even more. The commander realizes that there's no point in arguing with words over this, so she tells Ogru to do his worst, and if he manages to beat her, then she gives him permission to do whatever he wants with her. Ogru doesn't say anything more because he has already dismounted his bear to play 1 versus 1. Before he starts, he gives orders to his team to not kill the skilled members of the commander's special unit because they may be useful later on. They are free to kill or eat anyone else though. In the following minutes, a massacre of horrific proportions took place. It is already pretty much expected that no one will be able to compete with Aokichi in terms of strength, but then we see Dami using her bewitchment spell, and even she is scared by the power she possesses. One look at her eyes and all the soldiers become tier 3 simps who are willing to kill anything that moves for her, including themselves, and once a good number of the soldiers are already dead, Bloodsailor steps in and steals their blood to make weapons that will be used to kill even more soldiers, so the battle ended in a pretty one-sided victory. But back on Ogru's end, the commander's sword actually managed to touch him. It's an insignificant wound and it won't do much to help her win this battle, but it is still impressive to him that a human like her managed to touch him at all. Just then, the commander's mage executes the kamikaze option since this battle is an obvious loss, so he casts a Flame and Dragon spell which even Ogru would probably not be able to withstand if he took it head-on. The commander already knows this battle is hopeless, so she is prepared to let herself die if it means that Ogru will be taken down as well. However, as the spell approaches, Ogru pulls her out of the way and says he won't be letting her throw her life away, so he turns his back to the Flame and Dragon spell and casts several layers of shields in rapid succession with varying effects. It's not a perfect technique, but it was effective in neutralizing the dragon, so the results of this battle come out as an overwhelming victory for Parabellum. He is really proud of himself for managing to capture such a skilled swordswoman, so he's going to make sure to put her sword handling skills to good use later. Since they are done here, Ogru calls for everyone to get ready so they can head back to their cave, but not before Ogru has eaten all the human corpses and gained a ton of their skills. A while later, the elf chief shows up at Ogru's cave with the wine Ogru loves so much, and a party was held between the elves and goblins to celebrate the halting of the human army. Since his own troops were late to respond to the human forces, the chief decided it would be fitting to bring alcohol, so they can at least celebrate the victory. Ogru has no complaints since he gets to drink even more savory wine, but while the party was still going on, he went to the back of the cave to see how his prisoners are holding up. And the 2 women he brought back seemed to be just about ready to give in to him. He may have done a little bit of aphrodisiac drugging to make them more cooperative, but Ogru gave up things like morality a long time ago, so anything goes as long as he gets new additions to his harem. The Knight Commander tries to hold out by saying she's a noblewoman, so she would never allow herself to breed with an ogre, but from the look on her deputy's face, I don't think that stopped Ogru from doing his thing. By the next day, Ogru sat down with the Knight Commander and put one of his communication earrings on her, and with its effects, she wasn't able to lie to him at all, so he managed to gather a lot of really useful information about the human army. Not for his sake, but rather because the elf elder doesn't want to have to be relying on Ogru so often, since this is a problem that the elves ultimately need to deal with on their own. Which is why he offered to buy any information Ogru is able to get from his prisoners. He offers Ogru 10 more barrels of wine as payment, and Ogru can never say no to good wine. After acquiring the information from the Knight Commander, he relayed everything to the elf elder through his communication bracelet. He informs them that the humans are planning to ambush the elf village from 3 separate directions to overwhelm their forces. So on the day that the attack is meant to take place, Ogru and Aokichi got there early to lay out a bunch of traps, and then they just waited for the humans to arrive. As they spotted the 500 soldiers marching along the path, Ogru gave the signal for the road to block off with trees, and after that, the rest of the goblins proceed to roll boulders down on top of them, instantly cutting their numbers down to 300. And then Nemi's long range started their rain of arrows, which further diminished the number of soldiers till they were below 100. However, it was at this point that the commanding knight realized that they were at a disadvantage, so he ordered his surviving troops to build a wall with all the rocks and dead bodies they can find, and after hunkering down, they managed to fight back against the goblins until it became a stalemate. Ogru was impressed by the intelligence of the commanding knight, so he asks Akechi to charge down there himself and see if he can capture the commanding knight alive. Akechi charges down there and inside the makeshift fortress starts fighting with the knight commander. The knight gets knocked back, but even in the face of Akechi's overwhelming strength, he was still able to smile. Akechi tries to strike him down, but the knight ducks under and counters with a strike of his own, forcing Akechi to have to go on the defensive. Ogro has been watching this whole thing, and for once he actually seems to be interested in the ability of someone outside of adding them to his harem. Even if Akechi has instructions not to kill him, he still finds it impressive that human can hold out in a 1v1 against him. Although it doesn't last long since Akechi eventually knocks him out anyway. They are done with their mission now, so Ogro plans to report their victory to the Elf Elder and return to base after eating the corpses as usual. But once he is done with that, Demi comes up to him and asks for some special baby batter treatment tonight, which Ogro is happy to provide. The next day, the prisoners of war are all held in the cell together, and two other guys are lamenting over the humiliation of their situation. The red-haired commander tells them to shut up since this place isn't actually that bad considering they get good food and a place to stay. They don't agree with the sentiment, but while the other guys were nobles, the redhead was a commoner, so this is actually better than the way he got treated back in the human kingdom. Later on, Ogro questions the redhead on the reason why the human kingdom chose to invade the elves, so he explains that the princess of one of the human lands fell ill with a disease that has a 99% fatality rate, but she was set to get married to the emperor, so the emperor ordered a nationwide search for a cure for this disease. Eventually, they heard of a medicine that could cure all diseases, but it could only be found in the elf village, so naturally, the next logical step was to invade them without trying to negotiate. Ogro now understands the reason the war started, and it all boils down to human greed, although he kind of understands the human's point of view since he was once human himself. At the same moment, Earthy was busy mining to expand the cave, but after she hit a crack, a lot of water suddenly started pouring out of the cave and onto the floor. Everyone rushes in to check on her and see if she's hurt, but it turns out they just hit a pocket of water in the caves, and Ogro knows exactly what to do with it. After a few short hours of work, Ogro has completed construction on the first ever Goblin cave bathhouse, and immediately after it is complete, everyone takes a break to have a soak inside the relaxing bath. The next day, Ogro had an idea to improve the fighting capabilities of his troops, so he brought out the soldiers he had captured and set them up to train alongside his own men. This way, those who are less experienced should be able to learn a lot quicker by watching how an actual trained soldier would perform the task. So a simulated war was fought with Dami and Spelsey as the commanders and a mix of the different species as the soldiers. As the day's training continued, the nobleman prisoners got tired, but the redhead was still full of energy, so he goes up to Ogro and asks to have a match with him. Ogro admires the spirit of the young man, so he agrees to fight him, but to make sure he doesn't accidentally punch his body to pieces, he gives him a few buffs to enhance his strength and durability. After doing this, Ogro gets ready and begins his fight with the redhead, but while he was putting up a fight at first, Ogro soon demonstrates why he's the strongest person in this cave by knocking him out cold. Once the match is over, Ogro begins healing him so he doesn't stay paralyzed, and while he's doing this, Akechi comes running up to him and asks to fight Redhead next. Ogro isn't opposed to it, and Redhead seemed to like the idea as well, since a few moments later, he is fighting Akechi with a smile on his face, and he seems to be holding his ground a lot better. After training is done for the day, everyone sits down to eat lunch, and Redhead is currently eating with Ogro. He mentions how he originally came from a land with a lot of demi-humans living there, so he can't understand why the nobles here hate demi-humans so much. Here, all the races are able to live in harmony, and he can tell that Ogro is able to maintain order well, so he gets up and swears his loyalty to him. Ogro has a soft spot for diligent people like Redhead, so he releases him from being a prisoner and appoints him as the master of the other Redhead, so that he can train her in the ways of fighting like a human. Ogro has added another skilled soldier to his ranks, but the other noblemen aren't really worth keeping, so he asks the elf elder to take them off his hands. The elder agrees to take them, but before he goes, Ogro asks him about the special medicine that the humans were after since he wants to know a bit more about it, but the elder tells him that it was already given to him as a gift when he brought back the elf princess. Ogro doesn't understand why he would give something as precious as this if he is willing to fight a war over it, but the elder just has a grudge against humans, so there's no reason he can't give it to someone like Ogro. Ogro then takes a sip of this mythical medicine, and with his ability, he gains a skill for enhanced regeneration, as well as the ability to make his blood into medicine. To test it out, he uses it on one of the injured commanders, and with a single drop, all his wounds are instantly healed, so Ogru is left wondering if there is really no limit to how powerful he can get. A few days after the second battle with the humans, Parabellum was ready for the next job, and Ogro had been practicing a new skill as he used his spear to smite the human general and have him join the Donut Society. And since it is his spear, he was able to use it to create countless spears within the human base camp, wiping out a large chunk of the army without even having to set foot there. And with most of the army already killed, it becomes quick work for the others to finish off the remaining soldiers, and once the bodies have been piled high, Obru uses his slime ability to cover a wide area and begin to dissolve the corpses all at once. After today's overwhelming victory, Obru was invited to celebrate with the elf village chief, so he heads over to the village along with the redhead and the female knight. But considering that a war is currently being fought with humans, the elves of the village don't take too kindly to having humans in their village. Redhead asks if it's really okay for them to be here with the current situation, but Ogro tells them not to be bothered since the village elder is a much more understanding man than the guys outside, so he won't have a problem with them. Just then, the village elder and his daughter come out and with some wine so the celebration can commence. They all sit together and the elder thanks Ogro for his help since it's all because of him that the human armies have been really cornered lately, but prolonging this war will bring him no satisfaction. So he wants to end things quickly by sending his best unit out to finish off the last of the human army. Ogru agrees to do as the village elder wants, so he begins returning home along with the female knight in order to finalize the plans of attack against the humans, but along the way the female knight says she has something she needs to tell him. She has devoted herself to Ogro, but she also has a duty to the kingdom, so she asks that Ogro send some of the medicine he acquired from the elves to the kingdom in order for them to cure the princess of her illness. Ogro doesn't think it's a bad idea since it would stop the humans from having to fight the elves and would also get him in their good graces in case he ever needs backup in the future, but there's only one problem with her plan. The main religion of this world, the 5 great grand gods who give blessings so powerful that it could lead to all kinds of problems. Personally, Obrau has received blessings from the god of demise and origin, so if he shows up and delivers medicine out of nowhere, it may start some trouble. But then Ogro realizes that he can use that to his advantage anyway, so he says he'll consider the female knight's proposal. That night, the next target was set to be the human army's main base, which consisted of about 2,000 soldiers, and when compared to the size of their 650 soldiers, it is clear that they would lose in a head-on clash without a plan, especially with the information Ogro received about the humans having gotten back up from the people known as the heroes. Ogro heard from the male redhead and the female knight that the 8 heroes are the mightiest warriors among the humans who have received blessings from the gods. Their individual strengths are already impressive to begin with, but they also have the power to enhance the abilities of their allies as well, so it will make the battle with the final army really troublesome. But Ogro was just excited to gain some next powerful abilities after killing and eating them. To begin the attack, he summons several skeleton soldiers, and Dami asks if that's really such a wise move since the sun will be coming out soon, and it will destroy all of them. Ogru acknowledges her concerns, but he has made some modifications to the skeletons so they'll be able to serve their purpose. In the meantime, he's going to leave clearing out the soldiers around them to Akichi, while he will strike at the center alongside the skeletons. From the darkness, the army of skeletons emerges and descends upon the humans, and they are forced into an all-out clash with them. The humans do their best to just hold out until sunrise since they know the skeletons will be weakened by sunlight, but once the sun has risen and some of the skeletons begin to get destroyed, Ogru's modifications kick in and the skeletons are coated in Ogru's slime to prevent them from burning up. This puts the army in a bad position, and once they are sufficiently weakened, Ogru takes over and is ready to take out the remaining soldiers by himself. Meanwhile, the hero that got called in is being escorted to the base camp, and he's a little pissed that his vacation got interrupted by a war over a bottle of medicine, but he is at least glad that he gets to do something interesting since he has seen Ogro and he looks really strong. After Ogro finished charging up his move, he was able to use a mixture of blood and water to slash up all the soldiers in the area, but once that was done, he was feeling a bit hungry, so he took a break to eat one of the animal corpses. While he was eating, the hero calls out to him and politely asks if he can fight Ogro next if he's got some spare time. Ogru recognizes him from his appearance, and the bug hero Filippo is happy that he is famous enough to have been recognized, but he doesn't like the bug part of his title since it makes it sound like he is an actual bug, and it pisses him off. But does look like a bug though. The compound eyes on his face are proof of his blessing from the enchantress god, and Filippo is impressed that Ogro could tell that much just from looking at him, and he realizes that Ogro must be the same ogre that has been eradicating all the human armies lately. He isn't happy because all his vacation time was ruined because of it, but while he's throwing a tantrum, Ogru realizes that while Filippo may act like a child, he has a ton of battle experience based on the pressure he's emitting. Filippo mentions that he knows Ogru must have received a blessing from the gods as well, so he asks Ogru to tell him what kind it is. Ogru doesn't really want to divulge any secrets, so Filippo moves on and shows him some bugs he created through the use of his blessing and some necromancy. And after splashing it all over a bunch of the corpses, they begin to move. However, these moving corpses are different from zombies because they aren't affected by sunlight at all, and after a few moments, the bugs begin modifying the corpses to become more bug-like, and once that's done, they all attack Ogru in unison and try to eat him. Filippo thinks he has won at first, but then he realizes that he doesn't hear the distinct sound of someone getting eaten by bugs, and that because Ogru is managing to fight his way out of the swarm. Filippo is greatly impressed by how many bug soldiers Ogru was able to destroy, but now he's going to be commanding them directly, so it'll be a lot tougher to defeat them now. Ogru is struggling a lot more, he is still managing to stay alive, which really has Filippo's excitement at an all-time high since any normal ogre would have been dead by now. But he has had enough fun, so he's going to end things by calling in his ultimate weapon, a giant centipede. This catches Ogru off guard as he gets chomped down on and is unable to get free. Filippo explains that this is his pet's creation, Ulterm, and he usually uses it for special missions outside the country, but he thought it was fitting to call it in here. Right now, Ogru is being injected with tons of venom from the centipede, and normally even a little bit is enough to kill almost anything, so it is really impressive that he is still alive. After Ogru succumbs to the poison, Filippo has Ulterm bring him Ogru's body over and pets it for doing a good job, but now that Ogru is dead, Filippo sends him back to go terrorize the other country again. He then turns to dissect Ogru's corpse and figure out what special abilities he may have had, but he finds that Ogru is gone and narrowly dodges a sneak attack aimed at him. He is even more interested in Ogru now and asks how he managed to survive, yet Ogru still refuses to give up any secrets willingly. Filippo is a little disappointed that he can't use Ulterm again since it has already gone to the next country over, but he still has other special techniques that he can use to fight Ogru. But first, he wants to introduce himself properly. Unfortunately, Ogru doesn't give a damn about who he is and immediately starts blasting lightning at him so he can end this fight quickly. Ogru tries to slash his head open with his axe, but Filippo manages to stop it, and he is getting pretty frustrated with Ogru being so impatient because it forced him to skip to secret technique number 2 without explaining it at all. But since things have turned out like this, he's just going to go all out. He uses his tentacles to stab his puppets, and in doing so, he absorbs all their traits into his body, thereby transforming into a fully armored bug warrior, and Ogru is starting to get interested in him as well. He counters Filippo's attack and punches him into the sky, before throwing a lightning bolt which Filippo manages to dodge. He can't believe Ogru is still able to keep up with him in this form even though he hasn't achieved an epic awakening yet. Ogru has never heard of this epic awakening thing, so he asks Filippo about it, but he doesn't feel like explaining anything after Ogru has been interrupting his monologues the entire fight. Ogru still wants to learn about it, so he intends to subdue Filippo and force him to spill the beans, but before that, he wants to even the playing field a bit, so he activates his own bug transformation to follow Filippo into the sky to attack him. While their fight goes on, Earthy has just finished taking out the last of the human soldiers, so their job here is done, but Thami has a bad feeling that something is wrong with Ogru, so she flies off to go look for him. Meanwhile, Ogru has just defeated Filippo, and he knows he has lost, so he intends to run away without an ounce of shame. Ogru tries to chase after him, but Filippo was able to move his bug suit to delay him a bit, and by the time Ogru has defeated it, Filippo is already long gone. Ogru is disappointed that he didn't get to finish Filippo off, but he swears that one day he will kill and eat him for sure. Just then, Thami finds him and flies into his arms, asking if he is alright, and Ogru says he is perfectly fine, so she is relieved. While Ogru was fighting Filippo, he sent one of his clones with his stealth ability to the main camp of the Empire, and he delivered the elf medicine to the commander there under the condition that the war on the elves be stopped immediately. And the commander seems to be a smart man because he immediately calls for everyone to withdraw and send a message home. After all, they have what they came here for. The reason Ogru decided to give them what they wanted was because if he had killed the main commander, who also happened to be a candidate for future emperor, then the kingdom would have put all their forces into obliterating the elves, and he wanted to avoid that outcome as much as possible. He doesn't want to lose any of the people that are precious to him. And as he runs into a couple of surviving human soldiers, he just tells them to go home because he doesn't intend to kill them for no reason now that the war is over. Besides, he has something much more important to do, and that is to give a proper burial to the 30 Parabellum members who lost their lives in today's battle. In this world, if you don't do proper burials for people who die, they may end up turning into zombies or ghosts, so after saying a prayer for them, everyone sends their wishes and hopes they rest in peace. The next day, Ogru is startled awake and finds a goblin named Hopfu staring at him. After all the experience from the last battle, a lot more goblins have managed to evolve, and now that she is closer in level to him, Hopfu wants Ogru's D2. Ogru ignores her and moves on with his daily rounds, so he checks up on Hobji, who has been healing all the injured soldiers from the day before, and as a result, he has evolved into a half-Saint Lord. He also picked up a rather unique skill, and is now able to create a barrier called Shell Field to defend himself, and it is even powerful enough to take 20 shots from Ogru. Meanwhile, Hopfu is looking to get some backshots from Hobji as well. Ogru explains that Hopfu had been eating a lot of zombies' corpses lately, so she ended up becoming a ghoul as a result, and I can't say it's related, but all of a sudden, she's been begging for the three of them to run a train on her, and Ogru is kind of freaked out by it. He tries to not think about it too much, but Hopfu isn't the only freaky person here, as Ogru ends up walking into the line of sight of Hob, and the eyes on her back of her neck are unsettling. She apologizes since she hasn't learned to fully control her eyes yet. Ogru explains that Hobmi became a Dodokimi, which is a species that excels in support through illusory magic and intel gathering, so she'll probably be better at it than Ogru. So for the new names of all the evolved goblins, Hopfu is now called Gofu, Hobji is now called Siji, and Ham will now be known as Dodome. In other news, 7 of the weaker hobgoblins in the group have managed to evolve into ogres, and they promise to keep growing stronger to make Ogro and those that died in battle proud. Ogro finds it strange how things have turned out since goblins are well known to be selfish by nature, yet these guys are mourning the death of their comrades, which is most likely due to his influence on them. He moves on to the kobolds, and they've been training to become fleet-foot soldiers, but Ogro notices that their leader seems to be missing, and once he finds him, he realizes he has evolved as well. Although to Ogro, he just looks like a middle-aged man who just discovered cosplay for the first time. The kobold also mentions that his evolution has granted him a true name, which is Ekike no Tsuji. True names are special names that individuals of a certain level are able to receive, and if an enemy discovers your true name, then they will be able to cast things like curses upon you, so it is pretty much suicide to reveal your true name to someone. However, the kobold made a point of telling Ogro his true name as a sign of his undying loyalty to him. But since his true name still needs to remain a secret, Ogro decides to call the evolved kobold Akira from now on. The next thing on Ogro's agenda is to figure out what to do with all the prisoners he has. So if he brings them all outside and announces, "You guys can leave if you want," he doesn't really care. But if they don't have anywhere to go, then they are free to join his army as provisional members. Some are not happy with being stuck as provisional members of the army, since that would mean they are the lowest on the hierarchy tree. And they can't accept being ranked lower than mere goblins. The goblins take offense to their statements of superiority, but Ogro agrees that these 3 are definitively stronger than hobgoblins. However, he still trusts the goblins who have been training here since birth more than a couple of random people he captured, so he just reminds them that they don't have to join if they aren't satisfied with his terms, but they do not really have anywhere to go, so instead, they challenge the leader of the mercenary group to a fight. If they manage to win, then they'll be allowed to take over as the new leaders. They seem to have forgotten how they ended up as prisoners in the first place, but Ogro chooses to humor them and agrees to their suggestion. He tells them to both attack him at once, and the two think Ogru is being a little too confident considering he's up against a Flame Lord and a Gale Lord, so they both release their Ord weapons to attack Ogro in unison. Gabji comes out of nowhere and explains to everyone that orb weapons are artifacts that give their wielders a significant power boost, and they also repair themselves when they are broken, so Ogro has no qualms about shattering them to pieces. After those two get blasted into a tree, Ogru asks for them to be healed, and since he's already here, he asks anyone else who has an issue with him to step up and fight. After he has beaten a couple more of the challenges, he asks for more healers to help patch them up, but while he was distracted, the one that looks like a gorilla sneak attacks him and has Ogro flying into a pile of rocks. He's really proud of his attack and proclaims himself as the new leader, but then Ogro comes flying out of the rubble and returns the punch, leaving the gorilla with a broken spine and shattered pride. He at least praises him for having the skills to set up such a good sneak attack, but now that he has been taken care of, Ogro starts looking for the last challenger, who is a half-Thamper. He spots him, but the dude is currently trying to raise up Thami, so Ogro gets pissed and gives him a much harsher beating than all the others. Thami eventually stops him, and since Thampers heals after they drink some blood, Ogro feeds some of his own blood to the dude so he doesn't end up dying. There were a few other powerful races there, but these ones were more grateful to Ogro for releasing them from captivity, so they didn't want to challenge him. And since they were being so cooperative, he decided to give them some special treatment. Just when Ogro thought everything was settled, the damper guy comes back, but this time he tries to raise up Ogro instead because he has fallen in love with the taste of his blood. But that just makes Ogro beat him up again and leave out of annoyance. By the end of it all, there are 50 new provisional members of Parabellum, and while a lot of them are dissatisfied with their current rank, they resolve to raise their position by proving themselves in battle. Meanwhile, Ogro took some of the dwarves to the blacksmith girl to help her out with the smithing, and one dwarf compliments her on her skill, but he thinks there's still a lot she could improve on. The blacksmith girl doesn't really like the dwarves and how they see their smithing as superior, but dwarven weaponry is meant to be the best in the world, so he was hoping she could get along with them to make some mythical weaponry. Once Ogro has some free time to himself, he decides to try experimenting with a new synthesis ability he learned the other day, and it worked really well for the first time he ever used it. Next, he tries using the chaos of the dead to produce a monster, and it does work, but the legion that was produced refused to listen to Ogro's orders, so he was forced to kill it immediately. After that, he tries using synthesis again to make a brand new skill, but he sucks at skill making, so he ends up just making one that makes him take damage in sunlight. He decides then and there to give up on skill synthesis for now and lays down to rest since he is mentally exhausted. On day 85, they began renovating the cave, and in particular, Ogro wants to make the hot springs a lot nicer so he can offer it as a service to the elves, and the first step towards that will be inviting the elf chief to come test it out. A few days later, the dwarves present Ogro with their latest creation. It is a very special warhammer, which they are giving him as a sign of their loyalty to him, although we couldn't really understand most of what they were saying as they tried to explain how they made it. That afternoon, Ogro then headed out into the forest by himself, and the reason is that he is here to meet the Dryad, who is excited to see him again. She wants to get down to business immediately, but Ogro wants to discuss some important matters first. However, he gets overruled and the Dryad once again drains them balls. The following day, Ogro gathers everyone and has them all begin planting crops to meet up with the demand for food. He got the seed from Dryad after filling her with his seed, so the plants that will grow from them are meant to mature much faster and taste far better than normal plants would. Those with agriculture-oriented skills will be the ones growing them. But since this is the first time, Ogro decides to join in as well, even though he doesn't know anything about farming. Redhead finds it reassuring to know there are some things even Ogro can't do, and he likes the change of pace from his usual violent workday. The next day, a few of the provisional Parabellum members returned home, and in other news, the noble prisoners were also released, but under far worse conditions since they'd all been brainwashed by Dami. The human army had begun to withdraw from battle, so Ogro plans to send the brainwashed nobles back with them to act as spies for him in the kingdom. And since Ogro successfully put a stop to the human invasion of the elves, the village elder invites him to celebrate with them during the Lurtolf banquet. The event seems to be pretty important to elf culture, so while Ogro was glad to accept the invitation, he asks the village elder if it is really alright for him and his team to be here. The elder admits that it does go against elf customs to have relations with people outside the elf forest, but Ogro is an honored guest to them. And thanks to Ogro, he has been able to keep the elf village safe, so he is truly grateful to him. A while later, Ogro returns home and finds that Earthy has dug up the last of the spirit stones that were left to them by Velvet, so as a sign of gratitude, Ogro decides to eat the last batch, and as a result, he gains a couple of new skills. Afterwards, Ogro hunkers down to begin some heavy-duty crafting, and after fusing a ton of bones together, Ogro is able to create this thing. The others are a little confused about what it is or why Ogro would make something so creepy, but he explains that it is meant to be somewhat of a vehicle for them to get around on. They need a transportation since Ogro is going to be taking all the human girls to the nearest village, but that just makes all of them worry that Ogro intends to kick them out. Ogro doesn't want to get rid of them, but he did make a promise to return them to a human village when they first met, so he wants to stay true to his word. Even if they ultimately decide to stay here, he wants to give them to head back at least once before they make that choice. The next day, construction on the new hot springs was complete, so all the people who had been waiting for a chance to return home finally got to leave. After that, Ogro and the girls spent some time gathering all the stuff that they could sell in the human village, and Ogro realizes how much of a help they've been to him with all the knowledge he has managed to acquire thanks to their help. That evening, he hosted a welcoming party for all the new members of Parabellum, and the next morning, before they leave for the human village, Ogro splits everyone up into teams so they know what to do while he is gone. He has a few rules, including gathering intel before any action is taken and trying to handle any trouble they run into among themselves. He also wants them to try their best to level up by the time he gets back, but most important of all, no one should let themselves die. With that out of the way, Obru gets ready to depart to the human village, and a reminder is given so no one goes and attacks any humans for no reason. With that, they all go their separate ways, and Obru looks back on the cave he was born in a few short months ago. He has lost a lot from being reincarnated in this world, but he has gained even more here, and there's still a lot of power prey left to be discovered, and he's going to make sure he eats them all. And right now, they are headed for the garrison city of Traint. 6 days later, Obru and the others finally arrive at the city Traint, but while this place is known for being pretty accepting of demi-humans, seeing a suspicious ogre pull up in his skeleton edition Bugatti, they all immediately panic and prepare for battle. The girls manage to explain everything to the guards, so the misunderstanding is cleared up and Obru is allowed to carry on with his business in the city and rent out an inn. Once they are all settled in, he gathers all the human girls and have a serious discussion with them. While they are in town, he wants them to take this time to decide whether they really want to live here after all or not. He will respect whatever decision they make, even though he would prefer it if they stayed with him forever. But at the end of the day, the only reason they are here in the first place is because they were kidnapped and imprisoned by the previous Goblin generation. Moving on, the rest of the day's activities include the other girls selling the goods they brought with them to the city, while Redhead shows Ogre the guild building so he can register with it. Of course, people initially freaked out upon seeing an ogre like him, so Obru just knocked them all out so they wouldn't cause trouble for him. Unfortunately, when he tries to register Parabellum as an official mercenary group, the girl had already passed out from shock. Since the usual reception is unable to help right now, an old guy goes behind the counter and tells Ogre that he'll have to fill out the adventurer registration form if he wants to be officially recognized as a mercenary group. After that was done, everyone decided to go shopping for some clothes, but Ogre has other plans and disguises himself as his human form from his previous life in order to blend in while he gathers information. The others are shocked he could transform this whole time, but he's always full of surprises, so they just accept it. After grabbing a bite to eat, Obru happens to walk down a dark alleyway, and as he does so, he gets cornered by 6 thieves, which would mean you're about to get jumped for anyone else, but for Obru, it just means he gets to have some dessert. After eating the thieves, Obru acquires a ton of new criminal activity-related skills, and he finds it a bit strange that all 6 of them were wearing rings with the same pattern. He assumes they must belong to some really big organization or something, and he doesn't really want to get involved with that, so he plans to leave soon. However, that is when he notices a group of thieves extorting a knight on the other side of the alley. The knight brought the money they asked for as ransom for the person they kidnapped, but all of a sudden, the thieves decided that they want more than 3 times the amount of money, otherwise they say they'll severely injure the princess. Obru heard all of this, and normally he might have helped, but a kidnapped princess sounds like a political nightmare, and this is kind of meant to be a vacation, so he's not interested in getting involved. However, when the knight realizes that the thieves have no intention of releasing the princess, he tries to fight back and immediately gets tag-teamed and dropped to the ground. The thieves were about to kill him, but that goes beyond what Obru is willing to let happen, so he steps in and knocks them out. Once he has gotten a good distance away from that alley, Obru sets the boy down, and the boy immediately starts yelling at Ogre for letting such horrible people live. He doesn't believe in showing mercy to criminals, and neither does Ogre, but he also doesn't show mercy to ungrateful people who yell at their savior, so he smacks the boy on the head. He then says he has his reasons for not killing them yet, but if there is some kind of issue he has which he can't let the public find out about, then he is free to call Obru anytime for help. He then reveals his true ogre form to him to ensure that he knows it is a serious offer. The boy is left confused, but ultimately, he decides to contact Ogre for help, and once they meet up again, he fills him in on the details of the problem. He arrived in this town with the princess a few days ago, but the arrival of the princess was kept secret from the public for her safety. However, the princess dumbass thought it was a good idea to sneak away from all her guards and go wandering through the city alone, which led to her ultimately getting kidnapped by the criminal organization. Ogre tells him he doesn't need to worry since he already knows the location of the organization's base. The knight can't believe it, but Ogre had used some of his blood to keep track of the thieves he beat up earlier, so he knows their base of operations is an old abandoned house in the middle of nowhere. With that information, Ogre is able to immediately target their base and wipe out all the thieves, and not long after, they find the princess locked up in the back room. While the knight is making sure she is alright, Ogre finds some documents on the floor that tell him that this whole kidnapping was planned from the start. Once they are outside and have set the thieves' base on fire, Ogre tells the knight to make sure that nothing of what happened tonight is ever revealed to the public, but the knight still remains insistent on at least reporting things to the king, so Ogre has to call in a favor and have the knight hypnotized so he keeps his mouth shut. The next day, Ogre receives a call from Seiji, who has good news for him. The The new generation of goblins have just been delivered successfully. Obro is glad to hear it, but today is the day he'll find out if the girls still want to stay with him. So he's a bit tense. But realistically, there's no reason for him to be worried since they are all already addicted to him, so there's no way they'd choose to leave him now. They've packed their bags to return to the cave, but just before they can leave, Obro is stopped by the princess from the day before who really wanted to meet him. She formally introduced herself and mentions that she heard that Obro is the leader of a mercenary group, so she has an important mission for him. She wants him to escort her back to the royal capital, and this whole time, Obro has been really impressed by how she has been talking. She sounds way more mature than she looks, and she hasn't flinched once despite being in the presence of a terrifying ogre, and it's almost like she has her charisma stat completely maxed out. However, in spite of all of this, Obro still denies her request since he's got other plans, and the princess clearly already has a ton of bodyguards with her. The princess retorts that all the bodyguards she has are so boring, so she wants someone like him instead. Obro tries to take his time and explain to her why she needs to stick with her bodyguards, and he can't accept her request. But she wasn't listening to him at all, so that completely failed. The knight then speaks up and mentions that they plan to reward him with a gold plate if he accepts, but if he really can't escort the princess, he won't ask Ogro to go out of his way to help them. Upon hearing that the reward for the mission is a gold plate, the girls immediately start badgering Ogro to accept the escort mission. A normal escort would only pay around 10,000 gold, but gold plate is worth 1 million, so it would be a really good deal. Ogro ends up accepting since he has some interest in going to the royal capital anyway, but when they are meant to depart, Ogro notices that none of the princess's guards are there and he has a bad feeling about it. His suspicions are confirmed when the princess tells him that she ditched all her guards in order to come here, so right now, there are a bunch of knights frantically searching for the princess. So if Obro is found with the princess under these circumstances, he could easily be misunderstood to be a kidnapper, but he still has to fulfill his end of the bargain and escort her since he already signed the contract, and once a contract is signed, it can't be broken. While they are on the road, the princess begins asking a lot of questions about the skeleton centipede they are riding on and some animals she sees in the distance. Obro patiently answers her questions, and as for the animal, he realizes they could use a lunch break, so he and Dami get down to slaughter some of them and cook some delicious meat. He also disguises the skeleton centipede so it looks a little less threatening, but he's still got a lot to deal with as the princess is proving to be a nuisance. She keeps getting herself into danger, nearly jumping off the carriage and messing with the twins when they are cooking, so Ogro gives her a good spanking to get her to behave nicely for once. The journey continues, and the group ends up coming across a nest of turtle snakes, and Ogro is excited to get them so he can enjoy the new meat, but no one else wants to help him get the snakes out of their nest, so he is forced to use earth magic to uncover the snakes by himself. Once he has gotten them out, he begins slaughtering them and asks the twins to start getting the sauce ready for the meal. And the princess seems to have finally learned some manners due to Ogro's spanking, so she offers to help the twins with the meal prep as an apology for messing with them earlier. Ogro is glad to see that the princess is finally learning to get along with others, and once the food is ready, they all sit down to enjoy another wonderful meal. After that, they all get back on the carriage to continue their journey, and Ogro has grown a lot more interested in the princess after seeing her character development. After traveling for a while, they take another short break, and Ogro decides to let the knight join in the morning training, and since it sounds interesting, the princess says she wants to try it as well. The knight is against the idea since training isn't a game, and she could potentially get herself hurt, but she is well aware of the risks and counters that it would be useful for her to know how to defend herself from threats. Ogro eventually agrees to let her join as well, and as training progresses, he learned a few things about both of them. Later into the day, the group is making their way through the mountains while they discuss the route they'll need to take for the next day. Going straight through the mountain is the quickest way, but it is also the most dangerous, so the knight suggests that they take a detour along the river to be safe. The path along the mountain cliffs is dangerous because of the presence of the Falaise eagles, but Ogro has never heard about these things, so the knight gives an explanation. They have the strongest race around the mountain path because they fly really fast and have strong poison on their claws. For these reasons, everyone wants to avoid the mountain path, but as soon as Ogro heard that there is a powerful monster that he can potentially eat, he already decided to hunt it down. The next day, they begin traveling right through the canyon, and all the regular eagles are really easy for Ogro to pick off. So they enjoy fried eagle for breakfast, but after that, the real challenge arrives, so Ogro tells everyone that they are not allowed to come out of the carriage until he says so for their own safety. An hour passes, and it's not like they don't have faith in Ogro's ability to win, but it's been an hour since they last heard from him, and some are starting to get worried. However, Dami has complete faith in Ogro's ability to kill the Jade Eagle, and even if by some tragic turn of events Ogro was to die, she would immediately go out there and either kill that bird herself to avenge him or die trying. Just then, they realized that things seemed to have gotten a lot quieter all of a sudden, so they opened the curtains to check if the battle is over yet. However, they are horrified to see that Ograu has lost his arm and is still being attacked by the Jade Eagle. But even though it looks like Obru is losing, he was actually just gauging how strong the eagle was. So now that he is satisfied with his mild training session, he starts taking things seriously and grabs his severed arm so he can eat it and regenerate. And after that, he transforms and one-shots the eagle. After the eagle is dead, Obru finds a spirit stone in its body, which is apparently a really rare drop, so the girls tell him not to eat it since it is worth a small country's worth of gold. Following that, Obru eats some of the Jade Eagle's meat and gains a bunch more skills and a new transformation from it. But while he was still checking himself out, the princess approaches with another question. She has been watching Ograu for a while now, so she was wondering why Ograu always eats everything he kills. Ograu has been asked this question in his previous life as well, but the answer is still the same. He eats everything he kills as a way of making up for the fact that he killed it. It is his way of carrying all the burdens and resentment of those that have fallen in his hands, and he doesn't plan on changing his views anytime soon. The group eventually arrives at the city of Mason, and they get the same reaction as last time since the people are scared of Obru. In no time, a mob of people have surrounded him and they seemed ready for a fight, even though I doubt farming tools would do much against Ogru. Ograu had expected this since this village is pretty remote and places like this are known for being rather exclusionary to demi-humans, but luckily, Ogru just so happens to have the princess with him. So after she makes herself known, the people all stand down and let them pass, so the princess is finally showing her usefulness. Upon finding out that the princess is among the group, the mayor officially welcomes everyone to the town and offers to let them stay in his manor, after which they are shown to the village's main attraction, a giant waterfall. Finally, at night, a party is thrown in honor of their guest, and they have good liquor here, so is enjoying himself. That was until one of the villagers got drunk and decided it was a good idea to grab a handful of Demi's cheeks. So let's just say things didn't end up well for him. After Obru had calmed Demi down, he apologizes to everyone for nearly crippling one of their people, so to make up for it, he issues a drinking challenge. The rules are simple. Anyone who is able to outdrink him will receive 4 silver plates as a reward, and that's a decent bit of money, so the villagers are all excited to give it their best shot. Although they never stood a chance against the 8-foot-tall ogre. By the next morning, Ogru's group departed from the village of Mason and headed over to the Cluster Mountain as they had planned, and nothing really interesting was happening. So Obru poked his head inside to inform everyone that they'll able to reach the base of the mountain in no time at this pace. However, that's when he notices that the twins don't look so good, so he asks them if something is wrong. They explain that they were the ones in charge of cooking for the entire village during last night's party, so they are still exhausted from the high workload. Ograu doesn't want to overwork them, so he says he'll take over cooking duty for the day so they can get a chance to rest for once. Ograu thought it was just some mild fatigue, but by the next day it became clear that it was something much more serious. Those girls are pregnant and heavily pregnant at that. Ograu has no idea what to do, so he makes a call to Gaji and asks what he should do. He is considering returning to Mason Village so that he will have a safe place for the girls to make the delivery, but Gaji tells him that returning isn't an option since they don't have enough time. He may not have a medical degree, but if they went from not pregnant to balloon in one day, then the Ober babies in them are likely stealing nutrients from their bodies to grow quickly, so at this rate it's going to be a delivery with same-day shipping. With no other choice, Ogru frantically starts searching the area for a safe location so the girls can give birth. With current events, he won't be able to look after the princess for a while, but she seems to understand the situation and just sits in the corner. The twins try to reassure Ogru that they are going to be fine, but even though they say that after getting checked, they seem to be getting a whole lot more skinny than they were before. Those babies are literally sucking the nutrients out of their bodies, so unless they eat something that is very nutrient dense, they're going to die. There's no other choice, so Ogru does the only thing he can think of and rips his arm off. He apologizes to the girls for this, but he's going to have to ask them to eat his meat, and it's going to have to be raw since there's no time to cook it either. The girls don't want to do it since they hate the idea of Ogru suffering for their sake, but Gami tells them to just shut up and eat the meat because Ogru can grow a new arm back in a couple of minutes and she has first-hand experience, so she can guarantee that Ogru's meat doesn't taste bad at all. The twins still refuse to do it, so Ogru takes matters into his own hands and takes a bite out of his own arm to force-feed his flesh to the girls. As bizarre as the situation is, Obru will do whatever it takes to make sure both the twins and his children survived. So after seeing how determined he is, they finally agree to eat his flesh for nutrition. After a while, the group managed to find a cave that looked like a good place to hunker down for the delivery. although there was a family of quad bears living in there, so they had to get rid of those guys first. Once the cave was clear, Obru used his skills to create beds for the girls to be a little more comfortable, or at least as comfortable as you can get when your stomach has gotten that big. To make sure they weren't in pain, Obru began constantly healing them until eventually one of the twins had their child reach maturity, which was so painful that it knocked her out. Obru then uses miniature blood clones to broadcast videos straight to Seiji, since he wants someone to know how to perform this procedure in case anyone suddenly gets pregnant back home. There's no way the baby is exiting the normal way, so Obru is going to have to take up the role of a doctor and perform an impromptu C-section. A while later, the babies have been born, and the twins are still alive and well thanks to Obru's healing magic. They are happy to have their children in their arms, but Obru is over in the corner taking a moment to mentally recover from performing his first operation with no prior training. He's glad everything worked out in the end, so as of this day, Obru, who is almost 4 months old, has become a father of 2. While the girls are celebrating the joyous occasion, Obru gets a call from Gobji, and after getting a look at the children, Gobji can tell that they are mixed blood ogres. Obru didn't know this, but generally when a demi-human and a human mate, the baby takes after the demi-human, there is a 1 in a million chance for the baby to be born as a mixed blood, and when this happens, they possess the strength of both races, but they are also deemed to be outcasts and are hated no matter where they go. They'll have a life full of hardships, so as much as he hates to say it, Gobji suggests ending their lives early so they don't have to suffer through it. Obru calmly thanks Gobji for everything he has taught him, but that was the dumbest piece of advice he has ever heard. Those are his kids, so even if the world is going to treat them as nothing but monsters, he will just have to provide them with enough love to make them happy. Seiji tells Ogro he doesn't have to worry about it since no one in Parabellum would discriminate against his children, but he also has something to say about the procedure he performed earlier. It seems pretty stupid to let the baby get to maturity in the first place when he could have just done the C-section earlier on and provided the nutrients himself once the babies were out, since the twins wouldn't have been at risk of dying, and now that he says it, Obru wishes he had thought of that sooner. At least he now knows this in case of any future incidents, so goes over to his children to hold them for the first time. Even though they are just babies, it looks like they are already lords judging by the gems on their hands, which may have something to do with all the gems and monster cores Ograu has been eating lately. The daughter is named Oro, and the son is called Arjano. Obru just named them after the colors of their gems, but it's bound to be better than anything Gobji could come up with. And now that the twins have given birth to his kids, they are finally important enough to the plot for us to know their names. The older twin is called Felicia, and the younger one is called Alma, and Obru thanks both of them for hanging in there since he knows it must have been tough. He promises to continue to take care of them and to remove milk from his diet entirely for the sake of his children. The next day, Obru went out alone to scout the path ahead in order to make sure it was safe, and that's when he runs into this beautiful beast of a giant deer. He immediately heard the boss music start playing, even with all his abilities. Ogru estimated that his chances of winning were still only 30% at best. It has been a long time since Ograu has really felt the threat of dying at the hands of a monster like this, so he is getting a little excited and goes into battle form. But after a few minutes of just standing there, Ogru realizes that the deer just isn't attacking him. Even though it has a really good chance of beating Ograu, the deer just came here to shed its antlers, so it's got no time to mess around with a random ogre. After the deer has left, Obru walks over to the antlers on the ground, and he knows that these things are guaranteed to grant him some amazing abilities. But since he's a father now, he thinks it would be better to wait for now and share them with his kids once he returns. Obru continues scouting, and eventually, he stumbles upon a battle taking place in the mountains. A mixed force of humans and beastmen were battling some Fomorians, and Obru can already tell that the big guy is the boss of the Fomorians, so he nicknames him Balor. As he watches the party fight against Balor's army, he can confidently state that they are the toughest fighting force that he has ever encountered in this world, but it looks like Balor has a final trick up his sleeve. Balor then uses his energy blast, and that was enough to completely decimate the party. Obru holds high praise for the party since they put up a really good fight and even managed to take out 4 Fomorians, but they just weren't strong enough to defeat him. Before Balor can finish off the party though, Obru uses his gauntlet to take him out. He's been looking for a reason to use his new sniper anyway, so now that Balor is dead, he intends to take on the human party next. But then, as the main fighter of the party stands to face him, Ogro realizes that they may have actually won the fight against Balor if he hadn't interfered. There's something about the boy that makes him think he has a lot more potential in him. And that moment of pause was enough for Obro to reconsider eating this kid, so he makes up a story that he is just here to collect Balor's corpse. In exchange, he offers to help them treat their injuries so there won't be any problems between them, and the party leader agrees. After Ogro has collected Baylor's corpse, he waves at the party before leaving, and as he walks away, the leader is glad everything worked out in the end. He didn't hear anything when they met Ogro, so he is sure Ogro hasn't reached Epic yet, but in spite of that, he wasn't able to find a single opening in Ogro's defenses. He is fine now, but his skill, premonition of death, showed him just how badly things would have gone if they ended up fighting Ogro, so he is glad they managed to escape with their lives. On his way home, Ogro ate Balor's corpse as a snack, and by the time the sun had completely set, he had made it back to the cave. Once he enters, he finds Alma and Felicia waiting for him with the kids who after only one day are already able to speak and walk, so they both come waddling over to him since they are excited to see their father, and Ogro couldn't be prouder of them. He later crushes up those deer antlers he got and feeds it to Aura and Arjano, and they both get a major power boost. Ogro and Redhead try a bite of it as well, and he immediately acquires a bunch of skills which he can't identify, and Redhead gains the new title of Sacred Beast Eater. If he was able to get this much from just a single bite of the deer's antlers, Ogro realizes there was no way he could have ever hoped to defeat something as powerful as that, so he is really glad it didn't bother fighting him. As it starts getting late, everyone settles into their sleeping bags, and as Ogro closes his eyes, he sees this familiar screen telling him that he has exceeded the level limit and will be evolving once again. After Ogro has obtained his new form, they set out the next day to continue on their journey, and as it turns out, more of the girls are pregnant now. This time, it's the alchemist and blacksmith, but Ogro has experienced this once already, so he knows exactly what they need to do and says he'll pull over near a place with water. This time, the labor process goes a lot more smoothly, so in no time, Ogro has become a father of 4. And now that the alchemist and blacksmith have Ogro's children, they are officially important enough to have names as well. So we finally learn that the blacksmith is called Emery and the alchemist is called Spinal. Emery gave birth to a high Ogro son, which Ogro names Onikoa, while Spinal had a regular human baby, which Ogro named Nicola. By the next day, they arrive at their final pit stop, Purgatory. Once they arrive, Ogro has the princess put on a disguise so that she won't be recognized in town. The knight thinks the princess looks wonderful in it, but Dami isn't sure why a disguise is even necessary. Ogro explains that they are pretty close to the royal capital now, so it would cause a fuss if anyone were to recognize her here. For now, Ogro wants all the new mothers to rest here for the day while the rest of them go to the Adventurers Guild to gather some intel. And the 3 lords have to come as well, just because. At the Adventurers Guild, Redhead is excited to see that the guild has a free training area, so she wants to try it out, and it just so happens that there are a couple of adventurers who are fascinated by how tough Ogro looks, so they ask him to have a practice match with them. Ogro isn't opposed to the idea, but he already knows he could easily defeat the adventurers, so it wouldn't be satisfying for him. So he suggests an alternative and tells the adventurers that they can fight the 3 lords over here instead. And to really motivate them, he says that if one of them can manage to win, then he will reward them with 5 silver plates. This piques the interest of the adventurers, so that the 3 lords are forced to defend themselves against the army of challengers. Dami thinks the whole thing looks like fun, but she'd kill everyone if she actually fought, so she's on assigned duty. Shortly after the fight had begun, the adventurers realize that they have no chance at winning since the lords are just too strong, so Ogro takes the opportunity to introduce himself as the leader of Parabellum and declare that they are a mercenary group with the strongest warriors you'll ever see. After passing out his business cards, Ogro and the others head out into the market to stock up on supplies, and while there, Ogro happens to spot something very interesting. It's a camera, and since it's something they had in his original world, he immediately buys it. And once he returns to the inn, he goes crazy taking pictures of his babies. That night, Ogro thinks about the journey they have left before they get to Oswell. They will take a few days to arrive once they leave here, and he's a little worried about what they may run into upon arrival. He also realizes that with all the baby drama, he hasn't managed to keep in touch with the others, so he decides to check in with them as soon as possible. First, he contacts Bloodzetto's group to see how they are doing, and Bloodzetto says things are going great here, but Spelsey has been buying books non-stop. Ogro doesn't recall giving them the kind of budget to make so many purchases, but Spelsey tells him he doesn't need to worry. She discovered an infinite money glitch, so she uses the elves they have with them as bait, and when bandits eventually arrive to kidnap them, Spelsey simply robs the bandit and repeats the whole setup. Ogro can't really argue with her strategies, so he just tells her not to draw too much attention to herself. Next, Ogro contacts Debome's group, and she reports that she's been gathering all the intel she can for a while now, and Ogro is glad to hear that she's working harder, but he also tells her she can take a break once in a while. After that, he contacts Group 4, but they never had a clear leader, so they've been getting into a lot of fights when it comes to choosing their next course of action. So to fix that, he just makes Habron the leader at random and wishes her luck with her new job. The only team left for Ogro to check up on is Akechi's group. But when he tries using his earrings to get visual, he sees an image of himself getting sliced in half. He doesn't know what to make of it, but it was so jarring to him that he has everyone take a detour so he can check in on Akechi in person. He informs the princess of the detour, and though it would mean an extra 2 days added to the escort mission, she is fine with it. She doesn't think it's a problem since they are already ahead of schedule anyway, so a few days spent on a detour shouldn't be a big deal. Obro thanks the princess for being so understanding, and with everyone in agreement, they all set out for the maze city of Griffos. And along the way, Obro has a lot of fun with his babies. Meanwhile, Demi is staring at an old necklace she still has, and once Ogro comes to join her at the front, he recognizes it as the necklace he gave her back when he was still a bald goblin. It was only 4 months ago, but it feels nostalgic to her since so much has happened since then. Ogro keeps evolving and getting stronger while she is still just a damper, and on top of it all, she was there with him since day 4, yet she still hasn't gotten pregnant with his child in spite of all the back shots she has taken from him. Ogro tells her that no matter how strong he gets, he'll never forget about her, and whether she gives him a child or not, it won't change how he feels about her at all. The next day, Ogro and the others arrive at the maze city of Griffos, and Akechi is probably inside the dungeon, so Ogro heads there to check it out. And as he arrives at the entrance, he sees 2 adventurers running for their lives. They tell Ogro that he had better not go in there since there's a minotaur in there that's unstoppable. Ogro goes to the city mayor to tell him that he believes the minotaur everyone is talking about may be his friend. The mayor tells him that they already sent a team of adventurers down into the dungeon to defeat the minotaur since it was causing a lot of trouble, so they head back to the entrance to check it out. As they stand at the entrance, they hear something approaching, and it is revealed to be Akechi and Earth, who have gotten really big. Earth sets down one of the adventurers that was sent down to defeat them, but she assures everyone that the dude isn't dead, just unconscious. Ogro asks for an explanation as to what happened that caused Ogro to see himself get killed, so Earthy explains what happened. They were at the deepest level of the dungeon where a rare monster called the Mind Mirror attacked them. This monster is capable of taking the form of the strongest being its opponent can think of, so it took the form of Ogro. Akechi was really close to being defeated, but while was on the verge of death, he managed to evolve into a minotaur and was able to use the power-up to win. What Ogro had seen was the moment that Akechi managed to defeat the mimic, meaning all of this could have been avoided if Ogro just called a second time. Akechi is now a new species of minotaur, and Earthy is a full Earth Lord, so Ogro is glad that his worries were proved to be pointless. Since they are in town anyway, he plans to spend the night here, but before that, Akechi challenges him to a sparring match. Ogro figured Akechi would ask for a match, so a giant hole is dug out, and the stage is set for the fight. Akechi spent countless hours slaying powerful monsters in the dungeon, and it was all for the sake of finally being able to beat Ogro and becoming his equal, so that he can stand beside Ogro as a true friend. Ogro is touched by how earnest Akechi is, so he readies himself to give Akechi an all-out fight. The two charge at each other, and Akechi pushes Ogro back with his initial strike. The axe he is wielding is so heavy and sturdy that no one other than Akechi could possibly lift it. But Ogro got distracted and is caught off guard as Akechi attempts to slash him with his axe. He manages to parry, but there is an additional fire explosion that he is unable to dodge, so Ogro gets burned. Akechi is now able to wield both fire and lightning at the same time due to his evolution, and while Ogro can ignore lighting since he has resistance against it, he still has to worry about fire since his resistances don't protect him against that. In terms of firepower, Akechi is probably stronger than Ogro right now, and Akechi isn't letting Ogro get any rest as he charges at him once more. Ogro is starting to enjoy this, so as he clashes with Akechi once more, he starts using his other elements to set up a sneak attack on Akechi. However, the attack fails as Akechi is able to turn around and counter it. Akechi then surprises Ogro by using his new Phantom Bull ability, and it's giving Ogro so much trouble that he is forced to use one of his own new transcendent abilities. It massively increases all the powers Ogro possesses, so with the extra boost in strength, Ogro is able to flip Akechi over on his head and pelt him with dozens of spear attacks. Akechi struggles to keep up with Ogro's spear thrusts, so he goes all out and erupts in flames to counter. The wall of flames obstructs Ogro's view, so he has no idea where Akechi will be coming from, and to his surprise, Akechi appears above him. He tries to counter with a barrage of rocks since Akechi shouldn't be able to dodge while he's midair. But Akechi does just uses his shield to block it all while he falls back to the ground like a meteor. Some of Ogro's rocks do manage to hit Akechi, but that just makes him more determined to ensure his meteor attack lands. However, he failed to account for the fact that there are spectators that could get caught up in his blaze of glory, so after the blast settles down, Akechi realizes he fucked up. Obro managed to control the flow of air to make sure the blaze stayed within the arena. But while Obro can regenerate from pretty much anything, Akechi's little outburst put the regular people watching in danger, and that includes Obro's children, so he's not letting this slide. He uses his black demon abilities to freeze Akechi in place, then he uses his giant hammer fist to knock some sense into Akechi, so he never tries something as stupid as that again. But even as he punches Akechi, the thought that goes through his mind is that of the first time he had to teach him a lesson, so he doesn't even feel mad anymore. And hopefully Akechi makes it back to the ground eventually after getting launched like that. After Akechi fell back to the ground, he and Ogro continued their fight with one another until the next morning, and after that, they went their separate ways, so Ogro and his group could continue to their final destination, the royal capital of Oswell. The capital is the first place Ogro has seen with actual indoor plumbing, so he's impressed with how advanced they are here. The princess is proud of her capital and attributes its advancement to the wisdom of its founders, but that's enough sightseeing for now because it's time to head to the castle. They arrive at the Umber Palace and everyone is amazed by how beautiful the building is, but the knight explains that the Umber Palace was built specifically for the princess, so it's more like her bedroom than anything. The others have only ever lived in a cave, so having such lavish buildings is a foreign concept to them. As thanks for Obro's protection, the princess promises to prepare a fitting reward for him, as well as accommodating him and his friends for the night. They are all invited to spend the day in her castle. The meal they are served is so good that they all end up getting fat over it. By nightfall, Spinal and Emery are having a hard time going to sleep since they aren't used to having such a large room and soft beds. And the twins are having trouble sleeping in the next room over since the damp cave smell they are so used to is gone, while the other kids are having no trouble at all sleeping. The next morning, Ogru wakes up and they all get dressed to meet with the princess, and to show her gratitude, she presents him with a placard in addition to his original reward. The placard is basically a letter of endorsement from her, so with it, Ogru will have free access to the capital whenever he wants. Ogru asks her why she's giving him this since there's a possibility that he will misuse it, but from what she has witnessed Ograu doing on their journey here, misusing the placard would be way too much needless effort for him to ever consider doing something so foolish. And besides, she may need Ograu's services sometime in the near future, so it'll be beneficial to her if he can skip all the checkpoints next time. She's glowing with so much confidence that Ograu can't possibly refuse, so it seems he has made quite the troublesome ally. They then head out to begin packing things up for their return trip, and since the princess got grounded for joining Ogro without informing her guards, her knight is the only one who is there to say goodbye. Ogro says it's fine since he already said goodbye to the princess, but before he leaves, he reminds the knight that he should keep up his training so he will be strong enough to be a significant help the next time they see one another. With that, the journey to return to Obro's cave begins. But while the journey was going smoothly, Obro notices that Demi seemed to be feeling down about something. She thinks she is inadequate to be by Ogro's side after Akechi became so strong, but Ogro reminds her of what he had told her before. No matter how strong he gets, he will never abandon her for being weaker than him. And he's always going to be here to help her get stronger, no matter how many hours or days they need to train for it to happen. In that case, Demi asks him to help her get stronger, so Ogru stops the carriage and tells everyone that it's time to help Demi train. Once they've stopped, Ogru gets out and uses his magic to summon several giants for Demi to fight so that she can level up, and as long as she is still able to keep moving, she isn't going to stop until she levels up. By evening time, Demi has completely exhausted herself, but she did manage to defeat a lot of Ogru's monsters in the process. However, she is still yet to evolve at all, and she doesn't know why. Ogru tells her she has worked hard enough for today, so it's time for her to get some rest, but soon after, Demi collapses from exhaustion. Ogru carries her back to camp, but while he's walking, he also loses feeling in his legs, so the others are worried about him. Spinal tells Ogro that it's a symptom of mana depletion, but since Ogro has so much mana, he almost never experiences it. It's a good thing this didn't happen during an actual battle, but since Ogru was using his summoning magic so much, not to mention his long fight with Akechi yesterday, Ogru is going to have to be more cautious about how he uses his magic. Just then, the twins yell out that dinner is ready, so everyone heads over so they can eat. That night, while everyone was in bed, Nemi sees the evolution screen, so by morning time, she excitedly wakes Ogru up to show him that she has evolved into a full vampire lord, and it's all thanks to Ogru acting as her personal XP farm. The first thing she does after Ogru gets up is to tell him her true name, Hikaterina, and with how true names work, since she's the first one to tell Ogru her true name, that cements her position as Ogru's official wife. She's incredibly happy now that she no longer feels like a failure, and Oboro is just happy that she feels good enough about herself to smile and laugh again. The next day, they were finally able to make it back to the forest where everything started. It's been about a month since they left for the trip, which is about a third of Oboro's entire life as a monster, so he was honestly starting to miss the dark and damp cave. On the other hand, Emmy thinks it's a bit cramped with all the new additions they have, but it's still their home, so she wouldn't prefer it any other way. However, as they return to the cave, they discover that someone went and did a little remodeling of the cave, but just a little. The cave now has marble walls and torches lighting it up, so it's not very dark or damp anymore. And it's way bigger than it was last time. The others come out to greet Oboro and others, and they tell him that since they arrived before he returned, they decided to do a few renovations before he got back so the place wouldn't be so cramped. Ogro isn't opposed to the renovations, but he has no idea where they all learned how to do this. They tell Ogro that he is always surprising them, so they wanted to work hard and surprise him for a change, although Aokichi and Earthy were the ones who did most of the heavy lifting. They still aren't done with everything yet, but Aokichi offers to show Ogro around the new village. First off, they created a large stretch of farmland since they have enough people now to try to be self-sufficient with their food, and the Dryad seems to have moved in as well, and she even leveled up, so she tells Ogro that he can call her Dorian, although Thamus certainly isn't happy about it. They also built a ranch for all the animals Ogro has tamed, and there's a giant residential block to accommodate all the new people they've got here. These little guys are called cat sits, and even though they aren't particularly skilled in combat, they are really good with building, and they are also insanely fluffy and cute. Just then, Seiji comes running up to Ogro and the others, and they are wondering what's got him so panicked, so he informs them that Gobji has been hospitalized. Ogro goes to visit him and tells him he came since he heard Gobji doesn't have much time left to live, but Gobji is offended since Ogro didn't have to rub it in his face that he's dying. He starts violently coughing, so Seiji tells him he shouldn't talk too much because of his current condition, but he's going to be dead soon anyway, so Gobji wants to talk to Ogro one last time. Ogro tells him he wants to make some introductions, so he calls for the girls to bring in his children, and he introduces them all to their grandpa. He had heard of the news about their births, but this is his first time actually seeing the kids, so he can hardly believe that Obru, who was born 3 months ago, already has kids of his own. Since they are all here, Oru thinks it's a good time to make some other announcements as well before Gobji dies. With all the new evolutions, since he is now an Apostle Lord, he is going to start calling himself Aparo. Since Aokichi is now a new species of Minotaur, he will now be called Minakichi instead, while Thami will be called Kanami. As for Earthin, even though she is now a full Eartha Lord, there really isn't much of a need to change her name, so she'll remain as Earthy. Aparo asks if they are all happy with their names and they have no complaints to make, but Gobji jokes that Ograo didn't really put much effort into their names. However, this is coming from the same person who named all the kids Gobs at the beginning, so they don't want to hear any criticism about names from him. Gobji still finds it hard to believe that the little goblin raised managed to become an Apostle Lord so quickly, and while he has lived quite a long life, he is happy he got to see something spectacular at the end. His only regret is that Aparu never let him clap any elf cheeks, but other than that, he can die a happy goblin. As Gobji closes his eyes for the final time, Seiji checks his pulse and confirms that he is dead. Aparu says Gobji can rest easy now because he will handle everything from here on out, but then he looks down and sees that Gobji went out the same way he always lived, down bad as hell. They hold a funeral for Gobji, and Aparu recounts how he had heard that Gobji was around 20 years old. He has no idea what the average lifespan is for a goblin, but even if it doesn't last long, he can spend his time with the people he cares about. He will make sure he gets to make the most out of every second of his new life. Appa returns to everyone and tells them that they are going to hold a fighting tournament in honor of Gobji to demonstrate everything they learned on their trip. Everyone is on board since it sounds like fun, and Apparu's kids want to join in too, so he's going to bust out the camera and take a lot of pictures. As the tournament is about to begin, Apparu lets everyone know what the rules are. They are all going to fight barehanded until one of them surrenders. However, they must be careful not to accidentally kill their opponent since the punishment will be severe if they do. Also, depending on how well they perform in the battles, the ranks in the group may change, so they should keep that in mind. The fights begin, and the first one is between the two redheads, and the guy wants to test how much stronger the female redhead has gotten since they last fought each other, so they charge at each other. The next fight is between Kanami and Spelsy, and even though Kanami is more evolved than Spelsy, she can still hold her own in a fight since she has picked up a few new spells during her trip. After that is the fight between Bloodsato and Earthin, and despite the size difference, Bloodsato still thinks this is going to be fun. Although Dodone doesn't think her fight is fun at all since all she can do is see attacks coming and dodge. but Gufu seems like she's having a little too much fun with her fight. As the day drags on, the main event is finally here, as it is Minakichi and Apparu's turn to fight. Before they begin, Minakichi thanks Apparu for everything, since it's all thanks to him that he was able to become this strong in the first place. Apparu feels the same way, and neither of them intends to stop growing stronger, so they both clash with each other. By the end of their fight, both Apparu and Minakichi are exhausted and can barely move, but Apparu still won the match. As for the results of the other fights, Kanemi came in 3rd place, with Earthy in 4th, while Bloodshadow and Spelsey were 5th and 6th. The fights went almost exactly how Apparu had thought they would go, but he's just glad everyone has grown stronger. That night, Apparu gets a call from the princess. He asks her why she is calling him so late at night, so she explains that she has a small job for him. Apparu isn't stupid, so he knows she actually has got something big planned, although he doesn't know what it is exactly. However, she manages to convince him to take the job, since it would be really good for the publicity of his mercenary group, so the next day he has everyone ready to head out to the royal capital to help the princess. But he never could have predicted how much trouble this would end up being. This was the end of Season 1. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more anime recaps.